At 3:47 a.m., a crime boss walks into his kitchen, blood-soaked vest, gun still warm in its holster, and the only thing that knocks him down isn't the bullet. It's the cry of a woman he'd never actually seen. This is the story of a man who chose love over power and paid the price with everything he'd built. Like this post, leave the city you're watching in the comments. I want to know how far this story has come. And don't leave. The ending will leave you breathless. The blood had already started to dry by the time Damien Kurogane made it back to the house. It wasn't his blood. At least, most of it wasn't. There was a cut above his left ear where a bullet had grazed close enough to part his hair, and that one had bled the way head wounds always do, dramatic and stupid, soaking through his collar and down the side of his neck like something from a bad movie. He'd pressed a folded handkerchief against it for 40 minutes in the back of the car, and now the handkerchief was stiff and dark and balled up somewhere on the floor of the SUV he'd left idling in the driveway because he hadn't trusted himself to park it straight. He was 41 years old. He had survived 4 assassination attempts before tonight. He had stood in rooms where men twice his size had crumpled to the floor and never gotten back up. He had watched empires built over decades dissolve in an hour. None of that had ever made his hands shake the way they were shaking now. Walking through the side entrance of his own house at 3:47 in the morning, one hand trailing along the wall because his legs didn't entirely trust themselves. The mansion was quiet. That was normal. The staff didn't come on until 6. The guards who worked the overnight rotation stayed outside and stayed outside for a reason. Damien had made it very clear years ago that the inside of this house was the one place in his life that wasn't a battlefield, and he'd meant it with every inch of his ruined soul. Inside was his mother's paintings on the walls. Inside was the smell of the rosemary she kept on the kitchen windowsill. Inside was the only 3,500 square feet on the planet where Damien Kurogane was allowed to be something other than what everyone else needed him to be. He smelled coffee before he saw the light. He stopped in the hallway, one hand still on the wall, head tilting slightly the way a dog tilts its head when it hears something it doesn't understand. The kitchen light was on. A thin bar of yellow spilled under the door and cut across the dark tile floor at his feet. And underneath the antiseptic cold of his own adrenaline and dried blood and gun smoke, there was coffee. Real coffee. The kind that takes time, not the instant stuff the guards kept in a thermos by the gate. Damien pushed the door open. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her back to him, and for a half-second his hand moved. Old reflex, muscle memory burned so deep it didn't need his brain anymore. Toward the gun at his hip. Then he registered the shape of her. Small. Hunched. One hand flat on the table and the other pressed against her mouth. And her shoulders were doing that thing shoulders do when someone is trying very hard not to make noise while they cry. In front of her on the table was a letter. Handwritten. Several pages. The kind of handwriting that pressed hard into the paper. The words spaced unevenly the way they get when someone is writing through emotion rather than thought. Damien stood in the doorway in his blood-stained suit and said nothing for a moment. His heart was still hammering from the ambush. His ear was still seeping through the dried crust of the handkerchief he'd pressed against it. He had 3 missed calls from Elias on his phone that he hadn't answered because he didn't trust himself to speak to anyone without his voice cracking in a way that would start rumors. And yet here he was, standing still. She became aware of him, the way people become aware of something large and dangerous. The air in the room changed, the way air changes before a storm, and she turned fast enough that her chair scraped back, and her hand came up reflexively and knocked the letter half off the table. She grabbed it before it fell, and she stood up, and she looked at him, and her eyes were swollen, and her face was wet, and she had clearly been crying for a long time before he walked in. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She took one breath that was more of a shudder and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't think anyone would be up." Selene Armand had worked in this house for 3 months. She'd come through the agency that Damien's house manager used for medical staffing. His mother, Helena, had been declining for 2 years, the slow kind of declining that never stopped but never quite finished. And she needed someone steady, someone with actual training, someone who wouldn't flinch at the harder realities of caring for a woman in her 80s with a heart that was working on borrowed time. The agency had sent 2 other women before Selene. One lasted 11 days before she gave notice without explanation. The other made it 6 weeks before Damien overheard her on the phone telling someone she felt like she was living inside a threat. Selene had been here for 3 months and showed no signs of going anywhere. Damien had spoken to her maybe 40 times in those 3 months. Logistics mostly. His mother's medication schedule. The cardiologist's visiting hours. Whether the pharmacy had come through with the new prescription. He paid her well. He paid everyone who worked in this house well. He had learned very early that loyalty bought with money was still loyalty, up to a point, and this house ran on that principle. He didn't know her. Not really. He knew she was South African. He knew she was 26 because Elias had run a background check on every person who came within 50 feet of Helena Kurogane on Damien's standing orders. He knew she sent money home because once he'd seen a Western Union receipt on the kitchen counter and had registered it the same way he registered everything. Filed, categorized, stored, never examined closely. Now she was standing in his kitchen at 3:47 in the morning with red eyes and a letter clutched against her chest, staring at the blood on his collar. "You should probably sit back down," Damien said. His voice came out lower and rougher than he intended, the adrenaline still sandpapering everything. I'm not going to hurt you." It occurred to him, as he said it, that this was the kind of thing only a person who might conceivably hurt someone would ever need to say. He hated that he'd said it. She sat down, slowly, the way you sit down when you don't fully believe the chair will hold you. She kept the letter in her hands, folded now, pressed flat between her palms. Damien crossed to the refrigerator. He needed something cold on his ear, and he needed water, and he needed to be doing something with his hands that wasn't pointing a gun at anyone. He got the water. He pressed a dish towel wrapped around ice against the side of his head and stood there at the counter, and neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. "Is that from your family?" he finally asked. She looked at him. "My sister. Is she all right?" A pause that lasted too long. "No," Selene said. "She's not." Damien didn't push. Pushing was what he did in other rooms, in other buildings, with other people. In this kitchen at this hour, there was something about the quality of the silence that made him want to sit inside it instead of break it open. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. His suit jacket was ruined. He'd known that since the car. He sat with his elbows on the table and the ice pressed to his ear and the overhead light making everything look slightly too bright and slightly too real. And he looked at the woman across from him who was still trying to hold herself together with both hands. "You're not going to ask," Selene said, "about your sister? About—" She gestured at him. At all of it. The blood. The hour. The general wrongness of the picture he made. "You work in this house," Damien said. "You've been here 3 months. You're not asking either." Something crossed her face. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like the face a person makes when they've already had the conversation with themselves and arrived at a conclusion they're not entirely comfortable with, but are going to live with anyway. "I had some idea," she said carefully, "of what kind of work you were in, before I took the job. And you took it anyway." "Helena needed someone," she said. "She's a good woman, and the pay—" She stopped, looked down at the letter in her hands. The pay was necessary. There it was. The honest version. No performance around it, no softening, just, this is the situation, these are the terms, I made the calculation. Damien had spent 12 years in rooms full of men who spoke only in negotiation and implication and strategic omission. He could not remember the last time someone had simply told him the truth without something wrapped around it. "How bad is it?" he asked. "With your sister. She needs surgery, cardiac. The waiting list in Cape Town is—" Selene stopped again, pressed her lips together. "It's a long wait. There are private options." "There are private options," she agreed, with a flatness in her voice that meant, "Yes, and I am aware that I cannot afford them, and I am aware that you know that, and I am not asking you for anything." The ice had started to melt through the dish towel. Damien set it down on the table and looked at the damage on the back of his hand. Knuckles split, 2 of them, from something that had happened in the chaos of the ambush that he couldn't specifically recall. He looked at it the way you look at a thing that belongs to someone else. "You should probably stop pretending you work in furniture imports," Selene said. He looked up. She was watching him with those swollen eyes, and there was something in them. Not judgment, exactly. Something more complicated. Like she'd made a bet with herself about whether she was going to say that, and the part of her that said to say it had won. Damien Kurogane had not laughed. Genuinely laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere real. In so long, he couldn't put a number on it. But the sound that came out of him then was real. It surprised him. It surprised both of them. She blinked, and then the corner of her mouth moved just slightly, and she looked down at the table, and that was the moment. That tiny, reluctant, exhausted, almost smile. That was the crack in the wall. "My mother thinks the furniture thing is very convincing," he said. "Your mother," Selene said, "knows exactly what you are. She just loves you too much to say it to your face." The laugh died. What replaced it was something quieter and harder to name. "Yeah," Damien said. "I know." He got up before it could go further, took the melted ice to the sink, set the dish towel folded on the counter. He could feel his heart rate finally coming down, the adrenaline tide going out, leaving everything underneath it raw and exposed. He needed sleep. He needed stitches, probably, from the graze on his ear. He needed to call Elias back and deal with the disaster of what had happened tonight. "Coffee?" Selene asked behind him. He turned. She was already up, already moving toward the machine, already going through the motions of something ordinary, while tears were still drying on her face. There was something about the efficiency of that, the way she just kept going, kept functioning, kept putting one foot in front of the other regardless of what was happening inside, that stopped him in a way nothing else had stopped him tonight. "Yeah," he said. "Coffee." He sat back down, and they drank it in the quiet kitchen while the sky outside began to do the very earliest, almost imperceptible thing it does before dawn. Not lighter exactly, just less dark. And Damien Kurogane found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. Staying. The ambush had been on the east side, near the river, in an industrial block that Damien's organization used for a dozen different purposes, none of them the kind you reported to the IRS. He'd been there for a meeting that was supposed to be a meeting. One of his distributors, a man named Cal Breyer, who had been with the Black Crest Syndicate for 8 years and had never given Damien reason to doubt him. Cal had called at 9 p.m. and said there was a problem with the shipment coming through the harbor, that it needed Damien's personal attention, that it couldn't wait. Damien had gone with 4 men. He should have gone with 8. He'd made the call based on history and relationship and the kind of confidence that builds up over 12 years of running an organization without ever getting seriously touched. Later, in the car with blood running down his neck, he would understand that the confidence was the weapon they'd used against him. They needed him to feel safe enough to be careless. Cal Breyer had been waiting at the warehouse all right, but so had 11 armed men that Damien didn't recognize. Not Black Crest, not any of the allied organizations, nobody with any flag that made sense to him in the first few seconds. And those seconds mattered because 2 of his 4 were already down before he'd fully processed what was happening. He'd moved on reflex. 12 years of reflex. He was behind a steel support column before his conscious brain had caught up with his body, and then his conscious brain came online and started doing what it did, mapping exits and positions and the angles of incoming fire, stripping the situation down to geometry and probability the way you do when the alternative is dying confused. 2 of his men had gotten out. 1 hadn't. Cal Breyer had taken a bullet from his own people sometime in the chaos, which told Damien that Cal had been leverage rather than a volunteer. Someone with a family, maybe, or a debt, or a secret large enough to pry him open. Damien had seen that mechanism before. He understood it. He didn't forgive it, but he understood it. The 2 men who'd made it out with him didn't know who had sent the 11. That was what was keeping Damien's jaw tight and his thoughts circling as he sat in his own kitchen drinking coffee at 4 in the morning. 11 armed men didn't materialize without coordination. Coordination meant someone with resources. Resources meant someone who had been watching, planning, waiting for exactly the right moment when Damien's defenses were low and his attention was divided. Victor Soren's name had come up twice in the last month through different channels, in the peripheral way that names come up before they become central. A rumor here, a property transaction there, a face spotted somewhere it had no business being. Damien had filed it. He hadn't moved on it yet because he hadn't had confirmation, and Damien had a rule about not starting wars on rumors. He was reconsidering the rule. He didn't say any of this out loud in the kitchen. He drank his coffee, and he asked Selene about Cape Town, and she told him about it with the particular ache of someone describing a place that is part of them even when they're far from it. The mountain that sits above the city like a stone guardian. The 2 oceans meeting at the Cape. The way the light falls in the late afternoon in summer, warm and particular, and like nothing else anywhere else in the world. She talked about her grandmother, a woman who had raised her and her sister after their mother's death, who had cooked with spices that Selene could still smell if she concentrated, who had believed with everything in her that love was not something you were given. It was something you built day after day, with your hands and your choices, the way you build a house. She sounds like someone I'd want to know, Damien said. She died 5 years ago, Selene said. I know. He paused. I meant if things were different. She looked at him across the table. The light was bad and they were both exhausted, and there was nothing romantic about the moment. Dried blood, swollen eyes, the particular desolation of 4 a.m., the letter about her dying sister sitting folded between her hands. None of it was romantic, and yet there was something in the way she looked at him that was the most honest thing anyone had directed at Damien Kurogane in a very long time. What would different look like? She asked. Not challenging, just asking, like she genuinely wanted to know. He thought about it. He thought about it more than he should have, given everything else that was burning. I don't know anymore, he said finally. She nodded like that was an acceptable answer. His second-in-command, Elias Vane, was waiting in Damien's office at 7 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee that were better than the kitchen coffee and a face that said the night had been longer for him than for anyone. Elias was 53, broad across the shoulders, gray starting at his temples and spreading. He had been with the Black Crest Syndicate for 19 years, longer than Damien had been running it, a holdover from Damien's father's era who had pivoted his loyalty cleanly and completely when the old man was killed and the son stepped up. He was not a sentimental man. He was not a man who spent much time in abstract questions. He was the kind of man who, when a situation deteriorated, identified the next step and took it without requiring much in the way of ceremony or feeling first. He looked at the dried blood on Damien's neck and the swelling above his ear and said, "You need stitches. Tell me about last night. You need stitches first." Elias. Elias set down his coffee. Cal Breyer's been compromised for at least 6 weeks. We found his phone. Encrypted messages to a relay we're still tracing, but the relay goes east, not local. The 11 men were brought in from outside. 2 of them were ex-military from a private security outfit based out of Prague that we've seen tied to Victor Sorin's operations before. Sorin. It's his opening move, Elias said, which means he's been watching us long enough to map our patterns. The warehouse meeting, your rotation schedule, the timing, that's months of surveillance. He didn't do this on impulse. He built it. Who else knows about last night? Inside the organization, the people who were there. Outside, Elias paused. There'll be noise by noon. There's already noise. Damien stood at the window. The morning was gray and the city was just waking up beneath it. The ordinary machinery of the world turning over, people going to work and buying coffee and navigating the specific small difficulties of their lives. He watched it from behind bulletproof glass and tried to remember if he had ever been part of that. He was pretty sure he hadn't. He had grown up in this world, the son of a man who had built something monstrous and called it an empire, and the transition from son to heir had been violent and absolute and had not left much room for anything else. He'll test us again before he moves openly, Damien said. Yes. How long do we have? Weeks, maybe less if he thinks the ambush rattled us enough to create openings. Did it? Elias looked at him steadily. That depends on what you do next. What Damien did next was go to his mother's room. Helena Kurogane was awake when he knocked, which was not unusual. She had always been an early riser, a lifetime habit that even the heart disease hadn't broken, though it had slowed the rising considerably. She was sitting up in bed with a book and her reading glasses and a cup of tea that Selene had already brought her, and she looked at her son in the doorway with the particular expression she had been wearing at him for 30 years. The one that was equal parts love and grief and the stubborn refusal to let go of either. You look terrible, she said. I've looked worse. That, Helena said, setting down her book, is not the reassurance you think it is. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her bed, the chair that Selene often sat in during the night checks, he registered, because it was pulled slightly closer to the bed than he usually kept it. He sat in it, and he looked at his mother, and he let himself be looked at. Helena Kurogane was 81 years old, and had the bearing of someone who had been beautiful when she was young, and had declined to let age take that from her without a fight. Her hair was white and kept carefully, and her hands on the book cover were thin but steady, and her eyes were the same dark eyes she had given to her son, the ones that saw more than they commented on. "Were you hurt?" she asked. "A little." "Were other people hurt?" He held her gaze. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The morning light through the curtains made everything in the room soft and yellow, the kind of light that belongs to a different kind of life than the one being discussed in it. "Selene told me you came in very late," Helena said. "She was up. She's up most nights for a while. She has trouble sleeping." A pause. "She has a great deal to worry about." "I know." He thought about the letter, the way her hands had been shaking holding it, the Western Union receipt on the kitchen counter. "Her sister." "Yes." Helena looked at him over her glasses. "She hasn't asked you for help." "No." "She won't." "I know that too." Helena picked up her tea, held it without drinking it. "She's a good woman, Damien, the kind of good that isn't an act, the kind that costs something." He didn't answer. There was nothing to answer with that wouldn't open a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. "I'm going to deal with something today," he said instead. "I need to know you're safe. I need you to stay inside the house." Helena looked at him. "What kind of something?" "The usual kind." "And your soul?" she asked quietly. "That kind too?" He stood up, leaned over and pressed his mouth to her forehead, which was the most tenderness either of them could manage in the daylight. "Get some rest," he said. "Damien." Her hand caught his wrist, light, barely any strength in it. "The woman in the kitchen. Be careful with her." He looked at his mother's hand on his wrist. "I don't mean careful the way you're used to meaning it," Helena said. "I mean the other kind. The kind that matters more." He made 4 phone calls before noon. 2 of them were to men who owed him enough that they would move without being asked why. One was to a lawyer in a city 3 states away who had helped him navigate gray areas for 7 years and who would know what to do with what Damien told him. The 4th call was the one he sat with his phone in his hand for 10 full minutes before making, a federal contact, a name he'd kept like a last resort, like a key you hope you never need, buried under everything else in the place in his mind where he kept the things he didn't look at directly. He didn't make that 4th call, not yet. He put the phone down and stood up and went to find Elias instead. "I want surveillance on Victor's primary properties," he said. "Everyone we know. And I want someone talking to Cal's people, not to punish, to understand. I want to know if they have families. I want to know who else he got to." Elias wrote this down. "And for the streets? Hold. Nobody moves on anything until I say. There are men who are going to want—" "I know what they want." Damien looked at him. "Tell them to wait." Elias looked back at him for a beat too long. "You're different today," he said. "I'm tired today." "No," Elias said. "It's not that." Damien walked out without answering. He found Selene in the garden that afternoon. She was helping Helena, who had come downstairs with her walker, against doctor's orders for the stairs. But Helena had a complex relationship with her doctor's orders that was essentially lifelong, and they were together in the section of the garden where the herb beds were, Helena pointing at things, and Selene writing in a small notebook. The 2 of them looked, from a distance, like a woman showing her granddaughter something important. Damien stood at the window of his study and watched them for longer than was reasonable. Helena laughed at something. A real laugh, unexpected, the kind she'd been doing less and less. And Selene put her hand over her mouth and laughed too, and the garden was gray with November, but it was warm somehow, watching them in it. He had built this house 15 years ago. He had furnished it and staffed it and made it the safest place he could imagine because his mother needed somewhere safe, and he was the only one who could give it to her. He had done 12 years of terrible things to make sure the walls of this house held. He had told himself that was love. He had told himself that was what love looked like when you were someone like him. Not tenderness, not warmth, but function. Safety, money, the absence of threat. He watched his mother laugh in the garden and understood, in some quiet and devastating way, that he had gotten the math wrong. That night, coming through the kitchen at 11 p.m. after 3 hours with Elias that had left him colder and more certain about Victor Soren than he'd been that morning, he found the kitchen light on again. Selene was at the table again, but this time she wasn't crying. She had Helena's recipe book open in front of her, a battered, handwritten thing that Helena had been adding to for 50 years. And she was reading it with a small, focused frown, the way you read something you're trying to understand deeply, not just follow. She looked up when he came in. "I'm making her the lamb stew tomorrow," she said, without preamble, without performing surprise at his arrival. She said it's what her mother made when she was sick. The recipe has 6 steps I don't fully understand, but I'll figure it out. Damien looked at the recipe book, looked at her. "She hasn't made that in 20 years, he said. "I know, she told me." Selene looked back down at the book. "That's why I'm going to make it." He sat down across from her. She didn't move the book. She didn't acknowledge the sitting down as anything more or less than what it was. And they stayed there, the two of them, in the yellow kitchen light with the recipe book between them, while outside the walls of the house, the city turned in its sleep, and somewhere in it, Victor Soren was building something that neither of them could yet see clearly, something with teeth, something that was aimed directly at the one thing in Damien Kurogane's 12-year reign of stone and blood that had never had a name before now, something worth destroying. And 2 days later, when Elias came to Damien at 7 in the morning with a photograph, a telephoto shot, long lens, taken from a car parked on the street, showing Selene coming out of the pharmacy with Helena's prescription, her face turned slightly toward the camera as if she'd heard something behind her, Damien felt a coldness move through him that was unlike anything the ambush had produced. Because in the photo, behind Selene, maybe 30 feet back, was a man. Not one of Damien's men, not anyone he recognized from the neighborhood, or the staff, or the long list of faces he kept cataloged and current. Just a man, standing still in a moving street, watching her. And in the margin of the photograph, in Elias's tight, precise handwriting, were 4 words. He's already watching her. Damien held the photograph for a long time, not staring at it, not analyzing it, just holding it the way you hold something when your hands need something to do while your brain catches up with what your gut already knows. The paper was glossy and cold between his fingers, and the man in the background was slightly out of focus. The camera had been aimed at Selene, not him, which meant whoever had taken this shot had been watching her specifically, had framed her specifically, had made her the subject. And the man was just incidental, just a detail, just the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't already looking for it. Elias had been looking for it. "How long have you been running surveillance on her?" Damien asked. 3 weeks, Elias said. He didn't apologize for it. "You didn't tell me." "No." Damien set the photograph down on his desk with a flatness that took effort. "Why not?" "Because I needed to see what I was looking at before I brought it to you," Elias said, "and because I wasn't sure how you'd receive it. How I'd receive it." The words came out quiet and level, and Elias, who had known Damien for 19 years, took a half step back anyway. "You put surveillance on a woman who works in my house, in my mother's house, without telling me." "Yes." "And what did you see?" Damien asked. "In 3 weeks? Nothing from her," Elias said carefully. "She's clean, no contacts outside the normal, no phone activity that raises anything. She sends money to Cape Town twice a month, talks to her sister on Sundays, goes to the pharmacy and the grocery, and occasionally a coffee place on Halstead Street where she sits alone for an hour before coming back." He paused. "She's not an asset. She's not working anyone. She's exactly what she appears to be." "Then why is that man in the photograph?" "Because he showed up behind her 3 times in 10 days, Elias said. "Different locations. Same man. He's good. He varies his distance. He doesn't maintain eye contact, but he's not that good. My guy made him on the second sighting." Damien picked up the photograph again, looked at the soft focused shape of the man, 30 feet back, hands in his pockets. Nothing about him that screamed anything, which was precisely the point. "Victor knows," Damien said. "Victor knows something," Elias said. "Whether he knows what it is yet, whether there's even anything to know, that's a different question." The silence that followed that sentence was its own kind of answer. "Who else in the organization knows she works here?" Damien asked. "The staff roster isn't exactly classified." "Who, specifically?" Elias took a breath. 12 people inside the inner circle have access to the household staffing records. Below that, it's general knowledge. She's been seen coming and going. She's known as Helena's caregiver. It's not a secret. He paused. It was never meant to be a secret. She's a caregiver, not an asset. She's not an asset, Damien said. That's the problem. Victor doesn't know the difference. He stood up, moved to the window. The garden was empty this morning. Too cold. The November air gone from gray to white at the edges, frost on the grass. The herb beds where Selene had been taking notes yesterday were covered with a light sheet Helena had asked to be put over them 2 weeks ago, and the sight of that white sheet over the rosemary and the thyme did something to him that he couldn't name and didn't try to. I want a 2-man rotation on her, Damien said. Not close. She can't know. If she finds out she's being watched, she'll... He stopped. She'll what? Elias asked. She'll leave, Damien said, and I need her here, for my mother. Elias said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful in the way it got when he was managing the space between what he observed and what he was permitted to say about what he observed. There are other caregivers, good ones. I can have someone vetted and here within the week. No. Damien, no. He turned from the window. Set up the rotation. Don't tell her. And find me a name for the man in the photograph. Elias picked up the photograph, looked at it, set it back down. There's one other thing, he said. What? 3 of our distribution points in the South Warehouse District were hit last night. Not burned, not bombed, just cleared out. Everything in them gone. Clean, fast, professional. He paused. Victor's signaling. He's saying he knows where our inventory lives. Damien absorbed this the way a building absorbs a first tremor. Structurally, without visible damage, but with everything inside rearranging slightly. How much? Enough that it hurts, not enough to cripple us. He's not trying to cripple us yet, Damien said. He's showing us the blade. Yes. Call the men in from the outer boroughs. I want the core structure consolidated. He moved to his desk, sat down, pulled a legal pad toward him, and started writing. Not because he needed to, but because the motion of it helped him think. And I want someone in Victor's circle. I don't care what it costs. I need eyes. That takes time. Start tonight. Elias nodded, picked up the photograph, moved toward the door, stopped there with his hand on the frame. The woman, he said, without turning around. I told you. I'm not questioning the rotation, Elias said. I'm saying be careful. Love makes powerful men stupid. And I've watched this business long enough to know that the moment a man like Victor identifies what someone like you gives a damn about, it stops being a person and starts being a weapon. He paused. I'm not saying it to be cold. I'm saying it because you pay me to tell you the truth. He left. Damien looked at the legal pad, at the nothing he'd written on it. Bob. He didn't go to the kitchen that night. He told himself it was operational. Too much moving, too many calls, the South District situation requiring 3 separate conversations with men who needed to hear his voice before they'd hold steady. All of that was true. None of it was the reason. The reason was the photograph. The reason was the man in the photograph standing 30 feet behind Selene outside a pharmacy, hands in his pockets, soft-focused and patient, and already there before she'd stepped outside. The reason was that Damien understood surveillance, understood it from the inside, understood exactly what it meant when someone sent a man to stand 30 feet behind a woman and simply be seen, not to grab her, not to threaten her, just to establish a fact. I know where she is. I know what she is to you. The question is what you're going to do about it. The answer for a man in Damien's position had always been clear: remove the variable. Take the thing being used as leverage and put it somewhere the other side couldn't reach. Clean, operational, efficient. He sat in his study at midnight and thought about it. Thought about how easy it would be, how clean. A different caregiver. A polite explanation to Selene, a generous severance, a car to wherever she needed to go. Out of the picture. Out of the frame. No longer a soft target in a photograph. He thought about it for 2 hours. Then he went to bed and didn't sleep. The lamb stew was on the stove when he came downstairs at 6:30 the following morning. The smell of it hit him at the foot of the stairs. Rosemary and browned meat and something underneath that he couldn't identify but recognized anyway. The way you recognize a smell that belongs to a specific memory. His mother's kitchen, years ago, before the empire, before the blood. The particular smell of a meal being made with care instead of speed. Selene was at the stove with her back to him, adjusting the heat, and she had the recipe book propped open on the counter beside her with a coffee mug holding it flat. And she was reading and stirring at the same time with the total focus of someone doing something that matters to them. She heard him. He knew she heard him. She went slightly still the way people go still when they become aware of being observed. But she didn't turn around immediately. She stirred. She adjusted the heat. She read something in the recipe book and said, without turning, "The sixth step says to add the saffron 15 minutes before serving." Your mother's handwriting goes crooked on the word saffron, so for a while I thought it said safflower. And I bought safflower, and then I looked it up and found out safflower is used for dye, so... You bought the wrong thing. I bought the wrong thing. She turned around. She had a dish towel over one shoulder, and her hair pulled back, and she looked like she'd been up for a while, which he'd learned was normal for her. She was usually awake by 5, checking on Helena, moving through the house in the early dark, like someone who'd made peace with insomnia years ago. "There's coffee." "I see it." He poured a cup, leaned against the counter. "How long does the stew take?" "Started it at 5. It'll be ready for lunch." She looked at him. Not at his face first, at his hands he noticed, then up. "You didn't sleep." "I slept." "Okay." "What does okay mean?" "It means okay," she said. "You're an adult. You know if you slept." He drank the coffee. It was good. She made it stronger than the staff usually did, which suited him. "How's she doing this morning?" "Tired. She had a rough night. Her breathing was..." Selena paused, and the shift in her expression was small but visible. The professional composure doing what it was trained to do while the person underneath registered something the professional wasn't supposed to register. It wasn't alarming, but it was more labored than I'd like. I've already put a call in to her cardiologist. "Why didn't you wake me?" "Because there was nothing you could do at 3 in the morning that I couldn't do," she said. Not unkind, just precise. "If it had changed, I would have woken you." Damien set down the coffee cup. "I want to be woken," he said. "For anything. I don't care what time." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said again. But this time the okay had something different in it. Not agreement exactly, more like the acknowledgement of a request that she was going to have to weigh against her own judgment every time. And she was letting him know that was the deal. He respected it more than if she'd just said yes. Helena was sitting up when he came in at 7, and she looked pale and smaller than usual in the morning light, and he sat beside her and they had the kind of conversation they had increasingly often now, not about anything specifically. The news. Whether the frost had gotten to the tomatoes yet. A story she remembered about his father that she'd told him before but told differently each time, the details shifting the way details do in stories that matter. He listened to all of it. He was good at listening when it was her. "The stew," Helena said at one point. "I can smell it from here." "She's been at it since 5. Helena smiled. It changed her face entirely. That smile. Rolled back 20 years in an instant. "Her grandmother's method," she said. "Low and slow. Most people rush a braise." "How do you know her grandmother's method?" "She told me." Helena looked at her son with eyes that missed very little. "We talk. When you're not here." "What do you talk about?" "Everything," Helena said simply. "She's easy to talk to, the kind of easy that isn't performed." She paused, adjusted the blanket across her lap. "She asked me about your father." Damien went still. "Don't look like that," Helena said. She wasn't fishing. She was asking because she'd seen his photograph in the hallway, the one from 1987 when we went to Kyoto. And she was curious about the man in it. I told her he was complicated. That's one word for it. "I told her you're complicated too," Helena said. "I told her complicated isn't the same as broken." He stood up, moved to the window. The garden below was still frosted, still covered, the white sheet over the herb beds moving slightly in a wind he couldn't feel from inside. "Mama," he said. "I know," Helena said. "You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to tell me not to..." She paused. "To be careful about expectations. about what she is here for and what this situation is and isn't. She was quiet for a moment. I'm 81 years old, and my heart is doing whatever it wants, regardless of what the cardiologist says, and I did not raise you to be stupid about the things that actually matter. So I will say this once, and then I'll let you be. She looked at him. Don't be an idiot. Damien looked at his mother. That's it, she said. That's the speech. Don't be an idiot. He left before she could see him almost smile. Such up on. Elias called at noon with a name. The man in the photograph was a freelance surveillance specialist named Cord Weiss. German-born, now operating out of Chicago, with a history of short-term contracts that traced back through 3 layers of shell employment to 2 previous confirmed associations with Victor Soren's operation. Not a soldier, not a direct employee. Exactly the kind of arm's-length instrument you used when you wanted someone watched in a way that couldn't be directly connected to you. He's not the only one, Elias said. We found a second. Woman, mid-30s, was at the coffee place on Halstead 2 days before the pharmacy. She sat 3 tables away for an hour and left when Selene left. So 2-man rotation on Soren's side. At least. Damien was in the back of his car, heading toward a meeting with 2 of his remaining distribution managers who were nervous and needed to be unnervoused in the way that only a direct conversation could achieve. He held his phone and looked out the window at the city moving past, and felt the geometry of it crystallizing in a way he didn't like. Victor had identified Selene. Victor had resources watching her. Victor was doing this before he made any open move, which meant she was being prepared as leverage rather than targeted for immediate use. She was being established as a piece on the board before the board was flipped. I want Weiss and the woman picked up, Damien said. Damien, not hurt, picked up. I want to know who gave them the contract and how much they know about what they're watching. If they disappear, Soren knows we made them. He'll find out we made them regardless. I'd rather he know we know than have them out there building a file on her. A pause. And I want it done clean. No bodies, I mean that. There was a beat on Elias's end that lasted too long. What? Damien said. Nothing, Elias said. I'll handle it. Say it. It's just... Another pause. 6 months ago, you would have already known what to do with a problem like this, and it wouldn't have required the no bodies instruction. 6 months ago, I was making different mistakes, Damien said. Handle it. He hung up. He told Selene that evening. He'd been going back and forth on it all afternoon through the meeting with the distribution managers and the call with his lawyer in the other city and the debrief from Elias at 5 p.m. confirming that Cord Weiss and the woman had been collected without incident and were currently in a location Elias described as cooperative. Through all of it, the question had been running underneath. Tell her or don't tell her? Not telling her was operationally cleaner. She didn't need to know the mechanics. She just needed to behave the way she normally behaved, which she would do automatically if she didn't know she was being watched, which she wouldn't do as easily if she knew. But Damien was tired of clean. He was tired of the architecture of control, the constant calculus of who knows what and who needs to know what, and who you have to manage around the truth. He had been living inside that architecture for 12 years, and it had given him a functional empire and a complete inability to sleep, and the specific loneliness of a man who has made himself unknowable as a strategic choice. He found her in Helena's room at 7, the 2 of them watching something on the small television Helena kept on the dresser. Some old film, black and white, people in formal clothes saying things to each other with great intensity. Helena was laughing at it. Selene had her knees drawn up in the chair and was eating an apple and looked up when Damien appeared in the doorway with the particular expression she had, the one that was neutral on the surface and attentive underneath. Can I talk to you? He said. When she goes to sleep. Of course, Selene said. Helena, without taking her eyes off the film, said, I am 81, not deaf. I know, Mama. Whatever you're going to say to her, you can say in front of me. It's not... He stopped. It's work. Yes, Helena said dryly. The furniture importing work. Selene pressed her lips together hard. Damien looked at his mother and felt something move through him that was not entirely unpleasant. He waited. At 9:30, Helena was asleep, and Selene came downstairs and found him in the kitchen. His kitchen, at this point. The kitchen that had somehow become the room in this house where the real things happened, and she sat across from him and folded her hands on the table and waited. He told her about the surveillance, not all of it, not the organizational mechanics, but the essential fact. She had been watched by people who worked for someone who was trying to hurt Damien, and those people had been removed from the equation, but the fact of it remained. She was known. She was visible. She was, in the brutal vocabulary of the world Damien lived in, a potential pressure point. She listened without interrupting. Her face did things while he talked. Not dramatic things, not the performance of alarm, but the small, precise adjustments of a person integrating information that is worse than what they expected. A tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the hands, a breath taken and held and released slowly. When he finished, she said, "How long have you known?" 2 days. "And you didn't tell me for 2 days." "I was trying to resolve it first," he said. "I didn't want to—" "To what?" Her voice was still level, but there was something underneath the level now, something compressed and pressurized. "Frighten me? Damien, a man has been following me. That's information I should have." "You're right," he said. "I'm telling you now." 2 days later. "Yes." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to tell you it wasn't wrong. It was." She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet around them, the clock above the stove marking seconds, the refrigerator doing its low hum. "What does it mean?" she asked finally. "For me being here, for Helena." "It means I have people on you now. My people. You won't see them, but they're there." He paused. "And it means I have to tell you something I wasn't planning to tell you. Not yet." She waited. "The man doing this, Victor Soren, he's been building toward a war with my organization for at least 6 months. The ambush last week was his opening move. He doesn't want territory. He doesn't want negotiation. I think he wants—" Damien stopped, chose the next word carefully. "Annihilation." Selene was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up, pressing against the kitchen window with a low, continuous sound. "And what am I?" she asked. "In that, a way to get to me," Damien said. "If he thinks—" He stopped again. "If he thinks what?" Her eyes were steady on his, the stubbornness in them, the refusal to look away from the hard version of things. "If he thinks you matter to me," Damien said, "then you become something he can use." The silence after that sentence had a different quality than the silences before it. It was the silence of a thing that had been said out loud for the first time and couldn't be unsaid. Selene looked down at the table. "Back up." "And do I?" she asked. "Matter to you." He should have given her the operational answer, the clean answer, the answer that maintained the distance, kept the variables separate, protected the architecture. He should have said something about his mother, about consistency of care, about his responsibility to her safety as an employee of his household. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long time after that. "I need to think," she said. She stood up. "I need to think about whether this is something I can stay in." She held his gaze. "Not because of fear. I've been afraid before. I know what fear feels like. It's more—" She pressed her fingers to the edge of the table. "I came here for Helena. I came here because I needed the money and she needed the care, and the arrangement was clear. It was complicated, but it was clear. And now I'm—" She exhaled. "Now I'm in something that I didn't agree to be in." "I know," he said. "I'm not blaming you," she said, in a way that very slightly blamed him. "I know that too." She went upstairs. She was still there in the morning. He found her at 5:15 doing Helena's early vitals. Blood pressure, oxygen, the quiet medical liturgy of the pre-dawn hours. And she moved through it with the same efficiency she always brought, and didn't look up when he stood in the doorway. But she didn't ask him to leave either. And in Selene Armand's particular emotional vocabulary, he was beginning to understand that was its own kind of statement. He made coffee and left a cup outside Helena's door. By 9 a.m., 3 things happened in rapid succession that took everything Damien had built up and began to shake it in ways he hadn't prepared for. The first was a call from one of his outer ring managers telling him that 2 of their active businesses, a laundromat on the north side and an import company 2 blocks from the river that functioned as a clean front for 3 different revenue streams, had been visited overnight by men who had not identified themselves, but had left clear and specific messages about what would happen if those businesses didn't redirect their arrangements. The businesses were run by people who had been with the Black Crest Syndicate for years and who were now, for the first time, expressing to Damien's man something that sounded like hesitation. Victor was talking to his people, not with violence, with the quiet offer of the other side. The second thing was Elias arriving at 10 with the information extracted from Cord Weiss. Weiss had been thorough. His file on Selene included her movements for the past month, her regular contact schedule, a copy of the Western Union transaction records, her sister's name and medical status in Cape Town, and a note, in Weiss's own documentation, that the subject appeared to have developed a personal relationship with the primary target beyond the scope of professional engagement. Victor Sorin, in other words, didn't just know Selene worked here. Victor Sorin knew or strongly suspected what she was becoming. The third thing was Helena. At 11:15, Selene appeared at the door of Damien's study, moving with a speed and a tight-controlled urgency that he recognized immediately as the specific quality of a medical professional, not panicking, but operating at the edge of panic's territory. Her breathing, Selene said. Come now. He was up before she finished the sentence. Helena was sitting up in bed with her hand at her chest, and her color was wrong, gray at the edges, the gray that didn't belong there. And her breathing was audible from across the room, the kind of breathing that works too hard for what it achieves. Selene was already on the phone calling the paramedics, her voice calm and precise and giving information in the ordered way of someone trained for exactly this. And Damien sat on the edge of his mother's bed and took her hand, and Helena looked at him with eyes that were frightened and also, underneath the fright, somehow at peace, as if she had been expecting this visit for some time and had gotten most of her arrangements in order. Don't, Damien said. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Helena said, though it cost her breath to say it. Like you're saying goodbye. I'm not saying goodbye, she said. I'm just a difficult breath. I'm tired, Damien. I know. The paramedics are coming. You just have to... I know what I have to do. Her hand tightened on his, more strength in it than her appearance suggested. I want you to listen to me. Mama... Listen. Her eyes on his. When I'm gone, you're not... When I'm gone, she said, with a patience that silenced him, you will have a choice. The same choice you've been circling your whole life. And I want you to make the right one. I don't know what the right one is, he said, and his voice came out wrong, cracked at the edges, the voice of a man who has been holding something back for a very long time. Yes, you do, Helena said. Selene was there then, beside him, her hand on Helena's wrist for the pulse, her eyes on the clock above the dresser, counting. She glanced at Damien once, and in that glance was something that was not pity and not distance, but something that recognized what this moment was without trying to manage it, and that recognition went through him like a clean blade. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. They stabilized her in the bedroom and moved her to the gurney with a practiced efficiency that Damien watched and could not participate in, which was perhaps the worst part. A man who controlled everything, reduced to standing at the doorway of his mother's bedroom while strangers touched her and talked in the shorthand of emergency medicine over her head. Selene rode in the ambulance. Damien followed in the car with Elias driving, and he sat in the back and looked at his hands and didn't say anything. And Elias, for once, didn't say anything either. In the hospital waiting room, Damien sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent light and tried to hold himself together in the particular way that means not moving, not speaking, finding the stillness at the center of things. Selene was with Helena beyond the double doors. Damien was outside them with the information from Cord Weiss's file burning in his jacket pocket, where Elias had put the printed summary. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered it because unknown numbers at moments like this were either wrong numbers or something you needed to know. The voice on the other end was calm and measured and spoke with a slight accent that Damien had heard described but never heard directly. Mr. Kurogane, Victor Sorin said, I thought you should know that the young woman from Cape Town, the sister, I believe her name is Amara, has an appointment at a private cardiac facility in Johannesburg that was arranged on her behalf this morning, by my people. A pause. Consider it a courtesy, consider it an introduction. Another pause, this one longer, and in the quality of it something cold and deliberate. And consider what it means that I can reach into another continent and touch the people you care about before you've even decided you care about them." The line went dead. Damien held the phone, and the fluorescent lights buzzed above him, and through the double doors somewhere, his mother was fighting to stay alive, and the woman who had spent 3 months making that fight gentler was in there with her, and Victor Soren had just told him, with absolute precision, that the walls of the house had never really been walls at all. They had always been a frame around everything worth losing. And it had taken Damien until this moment, in a plastic chair under bad light with the smell of antiseptic in his throat, to understand that Victor Soren had been patient for longer than Damien had been afraid. He sat with that for exactly 4 seconds. Then he stood up. The plastic chair scraped back against the hospital floor, and a woman 2 seats down looked up from her phone and then looked away. The way people look away from men who radiate a particular kind of contained violence, even when they're standing completely still in a hospital waiting room wearing a rumpled suit under fluorescent lights at 2 in the afternoon. Damien's jaw was tight enough to ache. His thumb was still on the screen of the phone. The call log showing the unknown number in the way unknown numbers always show. Blank, featureless, telling you nothing except that someone knew how to cover themselves. He called Elias. "Victor Soren just called my personal cell," he said when Elias picked up on the first ring. A pause that lasted half a beat too long. My personal cell, Elias. The number that 8 people in the world have." He walked to the far end of the waiting room, to the window that looked out over a concrete parking structure. He knew about Selene's sister, her name, her medical situation. He said he arranged a clinic appointment in Johannesburg. He stopped. He reached into another country and touched someone we haven't even discussed internally in any organized way. "That's not possible," Elias said, and then caught himself because it was clearly possible because it had just happened. "I mean, the information chain for that would require—" "Someone inside," Damien said. The silence on Elias's end was the silence of a man doing rapid internal arithmetic. "Don't," Damien said. "Don't tell me it's not possible. Don't tell me you've vetted everyone. Don't give me the speech about the inner circle, because the inner circle is exactly where this is coming from." He pressed his free hand flat against the cold glass of the window. "My personal cell number. Victor Soren has my personal cell number." "I hear you," Elias said. His voice had gone to the flat gray register it went to when he was frightened and hiding it. "I'll start moving." "Quietly," Damien said. "Do not let anyone know what you're looking for. If the leak finds out we know there's a leak, the leak disappears and we lose the only advantage we have." "Understood." "And Elias," he paused. "How many people knew I was coming to this hospital?" Another pause. "I knew. Your driver, the 2 men on the exterior rotation." "That's 4. "Yes. Victor called me while I was sitting in the waiting room," Damien said. "He timed it, which means either he was already monitoring my movements independently or someone told him I was here." He let that sit for a second. "Start with the driver." He hung up. Helena's stroke was confirmed at 3:17 p.m. The cardiologist came out through the double doors with the expression, "Doctors manufacture for this particular conversation." Composed, direct, careful with the words, not unkind. And told Damien what had happened in the brain, what it meant for the heart, what the next 24 hours would require. Damien listened. He asked 2 questions, both specific, both answered. He thanked the doctor in a voice that didn't crack. Selene came out 10 minutes later. She had been crying, but stopped. The way she did things, efficient and self-contained, the grief present but managed, brought down to a functional level. There was a small smear of something on her left sleeve that she hadn't noticed, and her hair had come half loose from where she'd pulled it back that morning. She looked at Damien, and he looked at her, and neither of them said the obvious things. "She's stable," Selene said. "For now." "I know. The doctor—" "Did he tell you about the left side weakness?" "Yes." She nodded, pressed her fingertips briefly to the corner of her eye, a small private motion she probably didn't know she made. "She was asking for you, before they sedated her." "What did she say?" Selene hesitated. "She said, make the right choice." She looked at him steadily. "I don't know what that means to you." Damien looked at the double doors. "I do," he said. They let him in for 6 minutes. Helena was smaller in the hospital bed than she'd ever looked in her own, the machinery around her making its quiet, insistent sounds, the IV in her arm, her hair loose and white against the pillow. Her eyes were closed. He sat beside her and held her hand and looked at her face and tried to memorize it, not because he thought this was the end, but because there was a part of him that had known for a long time that the end was a matter of when and not if. And he'd never let himself look directly at that knowledge the way you can't look directly at something too bright. Her hand was warm. Her breathing was shallow, but regular. He leaned close and said, very quietly, the thing he'd been saying to her in his head for 30 years and almost never out loud. She didn't stir, but her hand tightened on his very slightly, and he chose to believe she heard it. Manavd. He found Selene in his hospital cafeteria at 5 p.m., sitting alone at a corner table with a coffee she hadn't touched and her phone face down in front of her. She looked up when he sat across from her. She didn't say anything, neither did he for a moment. Victor Soren called me, Damien said, while I was in the waiting room. She went still. He knew about your sister, her name, her condition. He watched her face. He said he arranged a private clinic appointment for her in Johannesburg. Selene's expression moved through several things in quick succession. Confusion, then a horror that she controlled almost immediately, then something harder and colder underneath. What? He's demonstrating reach, Damien said. He wants me to understand that the people I care about aren't protected by distance or by the walls of my house. He wants me to understand that he can touch anything. My sister, Selene said. The words came out flat and very careful. I've already made calls, Damien said. She won't be at that clinic. My people will... Your people! Her voice wasn't loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the very quiet voice of a woman who is working hard not to say what she actually wants to say. Your people will do what exactly? Go to Johannesburg? Touch my sister's medical arrangements? She pressed her hands flat on the table. I came here to take care of an old woman. That is what I agreed to. I did not agree to have my family in another country become a chess piece in something I have no part of. I know, Damien said. Stop saying that, she said. Stop saying I know like it's an answer. It is not an answer. She looked at him with eyes that were doing something complex. Anger and fear, and underneath both of those, something that was grief in advance of the actual loss. What do I do? Do I call her? Do I tell her not to go to this clinic? Do I tell her that a man she's never heard of in a country she's never been to has inserted himself into her medical care because her sister is... She stopped. Because her sister is involved with someone she shouldn't be, Damien said. The silence after that was very precise. I'm not involved with you, Selene said. No, Damien said. You're not. Victor Soren doesn't know that. He paused. And I'm not certain the distinction would change his calculations, even if he did. She looked down at the coffee. Back up. What happens now? I handle it, he said. That is the least specific answer possible. I know. Damien, I'm going to end this, he said. Victor Soren is going to stop being a problem. I don't know yet exactly how that happens or how long it takes, but I am telling you, right now in this room, I will not let him get to your sister. I will not let him get to you. He held her gaze. That's what I can give you. That's the specific answer. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that the cafeteria noise moved around them and neither of them acknowledged it. I called Amara, she said finally. An hour ago, while you were with Helena. I didn't tell her about the clinic. I needed to hear her voice. She curled her hands around the cold coffee cup. She sounds better. She said she's been feeling better this week. Good, Damien said. She asked about my job. She always asks. A small, complicated pause. I told her the family I work for is good to me. Damien said nothing. I didn't say it because it was easy to say, Selene said. I said it because it was true. She looked at him one more time, and in the look was something that cost her something to let him see. Then she stood up, picked up the untouched coffee, dropped it in the bin beside the table, and said, I'm going back up. She might wake before the sedation wears off, and I want to be there. He watched her walk away. Then he sat in the hospital cafeteria by himself and took out his phone and made 3 calls that were not gentle calls and spoke in the register he almost never used inside the house and then sat for another minute in the particular stillness of a man who has looked at a path he is about to walk and understands what's at the end of it. The betrayal announced itself at 9:30 that evening in the form of a name. Elias called. No preamble, just, "It's Marcus Hale." Damien was in the hospital parking structure, leaning against the car, getting air after 4 hours of the waiting room's recycled nothing. He heard the name, and his brain did the thing it did. Filed it, cross-referenced it, pulled the picture, and what it pulled was the face of a man he had known for 9 years. Marcus Hale, 38 years old, managed the Northeast Distribution Corridor, had been at the table for strategy sessions involving Damien's personal security rotation, his private contact lists, his household arrangements. Had been at the table because Damien had personally elevated him 2 years ago after Marcus walked into a dangerous situation and handled it in a way that had impressed everyone present. Had been at the table, Damien now understood, because someone had put him there specifically to be at the table. "How long?" Damien asked. "We're still building the timeline," Elias said, but the phone the driver identified as suspicious traces to a relay that also connects to a number Marcus has been using. There's an offshore transfer, small enough to miss, large enough to matter, that clears 6 weeks ago. And Elias paused. The relay that Victor used to reach Cord Weiss, the surveillance specialist, it runs through the same node. Marcus set up the surveillance on Selene, Damien said. It looks that way. Damien was quiet. The parking structure hummed around him, the low concrete echo of a city that kept moving regardless of what happened inside it. He thought about Marcus Hale at his table, Marcus Hale in his strategy sessions, Marcus Hale knowing the household staffing schedules, the medication routines, the personal cell number, the movements. 9 years. "Where is he now?" Damien asked. "His apartment. He doesn't know we know. Keep it that way." Damien straightened. "I want to talk to him myself." "Damien, myself," Damien said. "No one else in the room." "That's not Elias, myself." He went to Marcus Hale's apartment at 11 p.m. He went alone, which was the kind of decision Elias would have argued against harder if Damien had given him the chance, so Damien hadn't given him the chance. He drove himself, which he hadn't done in years, and the unfamiliarity of it, his own hands on the wheel, the city coming at him through the glass without the buffer of someone else managing the navigation, felt appropriate in a way he couldn't articulate. This was not organizational business. This was not something to be managed through layers and intermediaries. This was 9 years of trust being examined in the precise and brutal way that 9 years of trust deserved. Marcus Hale answered the door in a gray t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, a glass of water in his hand, and the look on his face when he saw Damien was the look of a man whose stomach has just dropped through the floor, but whose face hasn't gotten the instruction to show it yet. He was good. He held it together for a full 2 seconds. "Boss," he said, "I heard about Helena. I'm sorry, I was going to—" "Sit down, Marcus," Damien said. He said it quietly. Not the loud version, not the version anyone would flinch from if they heard it from a distance. The quiet version. Marcus heard the quiet version correctly and stepped back into the apartment and sat down on the couch, and Damien came in and closed the door and stood in the middle of the room and looked at the man he had trusted for 9 years with the kind of look that didn't need to explain itself. Marcus put the water glass down on the coffee table. His hands were careful and deliberate, the way hands get when their owner is concentrating on not letting them shake. "How long?" Damien asked. "I don't—" Marcus. Still quiet. "I know. Elias has the phone relay, the offshore transfer, the Cord Weiss connection. I have all of it. I'm not here to establish the fact. I'm here because I want to hear it from you." He paused. "How long?" Marcus Hale pressed the heels of his hands to his knees. He looked at the floor. Then he looked up. And in his face was the particular expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy in a dark room for a long time and has just been told the lights are coming on regardless. So he can either set the thing down now or be caught still holding it. 8 months, Marcus said. 8 months. Before the ambush. Before Victor's opening move. Before any of it had visible shape. 8 months of Marcus Hale at Damien's table, knowing, feeding, shaping what Victor saw and understood and planned around. "Why?" Damien said. "He has my daughter," Marcus said. The room went very still. My daughter and her mother moved to Portland 3 years ago. Marcus's voice was flat and measured and cost him something with every word. We weren't together. It ended badly. I paid child support. I visited when I could. It wasn't a clean situation. He swallowed. 8 months ago, 2 men showed up at the school. They didn't touch her. They just stood outside at pickup time and let the mother see them. And then Victor called me. Damien looked at him. He said he didn't want anything dramatic, Marcus continued. He said he just wanted information. Low level, schedules, patterns. He said if I was quiet about it, nothing would happen to either of them. And if I wasn't, he stopped. She's 7 years old. The silence in the apartment was absolute except for the city outside, distant and indifferent. Damien crossed to the window. He stood with his back to Marcus and looked at the street below and did the thing he'd been learning, slowly and badly, to do instead of the other thing. He held the information in both hands and looked at it from all the angles before he decided what it weighed. Marcus Hale had fed Victor Soren 8 months of intelligence because a man had stood outside an elementary school in Portland and let a mother see him standing there. It was the same mechanism as Cal Breyer at the warehouse. A family, a child, the lever that worked on anyone who had something to lose. The irony of it, Victor Soren was using love as a weapon against men who loved people. And Damien Kurogane had spent 9 years building an organization specifically designed to have no such vulnerabilities, had kept people at arm's length and kept emotional exposure minimal, and kept the architecture of the Black Crest Syndicate deliberately cold. And Victor had still found the cracks because the cracks were not in the architecture. The cracks were in the men inside it. The cracks were what made them men. Is she safe now? Damien asked, still facing the window. I don't know, Marcus said. I stopped knowing whether any of my information was actually buying her safety or whether he was just telling me it was. You should have come to me, Damien said. You would have… Marcus stopped. What? Damien turned around. What do you think I would have done? I didn't know, Marcus said. The honesty of it, at least, was clean. A year ago, I didn't know what you'd do. And by the time I had a better idea of what you'd do, I was already in it so deep that telling you meant… He spread his hands. Either way, I was finished. Damien looked at him for a long time. Your daughter's name, Damien said. Marcus blinked. What? Her name. Cora, Marcus said, the word coming out differently than any word he'd said so far. Stripped down, raw, the name of something irreplaceable. I'm going to make sure Cora and her mother are moved somewhere safer than where they are, Damien said. Tonight. I have people in Portland. It'll be done before morning. He paused. And then I'm going to need you to help me, because you know things about Victor's operation that I don't, and I'm going to need every one of them. Marcus stared at him. You're not… I'm furious with you, Damien said, very evenly. I am going to be furious with you for a long time. I trusted you, and you fed that trust directly to the man who is trying to destroy everything I've built, and 2 of my men are dead in part because of the intelligence Victor got through you, and I am not forgiving that tonight, or probably for a very long time. He held the man's gaze. But I understand it, and I am not going to hurt you, and your daughter is not going to be used as a lever against you anymore. Marcus Hale put his face in his hands. Damien looked at him and felt something that was not sympathy exactly, but was adjacent to it. The recognition of a man in a trap that had been built to be inescapable, by someone who specialized in inescapable traps, and the understanding that the architecture of Victor Soren's operation was not random cruelty, but systematic leverage, applied with precision to exactly the right pressure points in exactly the right sequence. He was very good, which made what came next worse. Elias called at 1 a.m. while Damien was driving back toward the hospital. We have a problem, Elias said. His voice was doing the gray flat thing again. A serious one. The warehouses? No, the lawyer. A pause. Your lawyer in the other city, the one you've been using for 7 years. Damien pulled to the shoulder. He did it automatically, without thinking, the car drifting to a stop on a dark stretch of road while headlights moved past him in both directions. What about him? He's been working for Victor Soren for 2 years, Elias said. We found it through the Marcus Hale chain. There's a payment structure that links them, the same offshore architecture. Damien held the phone. Everything you've sent him, Elias said carefully. Everything you've discussed with him. Everything you've asked him to hold or document or prepare. Another pause. Victor has it. The legal contingencies. The documentation he'd been quietly building for 2 years. The offshore accounts, the laundering networks, the political connections, the names and numbers of every corrupt official he'd ever worked with. The architecture of exit. The foundation of any future negotiation with federal authorities. Everything he'd been building against the day when he might need to dismantle the empire on his own terms. Victor had all of it, which meant Victor had known for 2 years that Damien had been quietly building a way out, which meant the ambush hadn't been an opening move. It had been a closing one. "He's not circling us," Damien said. His voice came out very quiet and very level and contained nothing of what was happening underneath it. "He hasn't been circling us. He's been inside for 2 years. The ambush, the warehouses, Marcus, Cord Weiss, none of that is escalation. That's Victor showing his hand because he thinks the game is already over." He stared through the windshield at the dark road ahead. "He thinks I'm already finished and he's just letting me see it." "Damien," Elias said, "every move I plan to make to get out of this, he knows those moves. Every legal protection I built, he has the documentation. Every federal contact I've been cultivating, he either has their names or he can get them from what the lawyer held." Damien pressed his thumb to the bridge of his nose. "There is no clean exit anymore. There was never a clean exit. He made sure of that 2 years ago." "What do we do?" Elias asked. "I need to think," Damien said. "We don't have time for—" "I know that," Damien said. "Give me 20 minutes." He sat on the shoulder of the road for 20 minutes. The city hummed in the distance. Cars moved past him, each one carrying people going somewhere that wasn't this particular stretch of dark road, living lives that didn't require this kind of thinking. He sat and he thought with the cold, systematic part of his brain that had built an empire, the part that stripped things down to geometry and probability, and he ran the numbers on every option he had left. The numbers were not good. What remained after Victor had spent 2 years removing exits, and after Marcus had spent 8 months providing intelligence, and after the lawyer had spent 2 years holding a file that was now a weapon. What remained was not nothing, but it was not what Damien had been building toward. What remained was the raw, unfinished version. The version without the careful legal architecture. The version that required him to act from a position of exposure rather than preparation. It required him to do something he had never done in 12 years of running the Black Crest Syndicate. It required him to surrender something first. He picked up the phone and called a number he had kept for 6 years as a last resort, the same number he had almost called the morning after the ambush and had put back in his pocket. This time, he didn't put it back. The line rang 4 times. Then a man's voice, careful and alert in the specific way of someone who does not receive calls at 1 in the morning unless those calls are significant. "This is Damien Kurogane," Damien said. "I want to make a deal." The pause on the other end had the quality of someone sitting up straighter. "I'm going to give you everything," Damien said. "Every account, every name, every network, the complete operational structure of the Black Crest Syndicate, with documentation, testimony, and full cooperation." He paused. "In exchange, I need one thing before we discuss terms." "What's that?" the voice on the other end asked. "Victor Soren," Damien said. "I need you to understand that Victor Soren is the primary target here, and I need your people moving on his operation within 48 hours of my first disclosure. Not after, not concurrent. Before you touch anything else, you move on Soren." Another pause. "Because the moment Victor realizes I've made this call, the people I'm protecting become the first thing he reaches for, and I need them out of reach before that happens." Silence on the line, then, "Come in tomorrow morning, bring the lawyer you trust, and not the one in the other city." "I know," Damien said. "That one's compromised." He hung up. He sat for another moment on the dark shoulder of the road. Then he pulled back into traffic and drove toward the hospital where his mother lay in a bed attached to machinery, and a woman from Cape Town was sitting in a plastic chair watching over her. And the empire he had built on 12 years of blood and fear was already beginning to come apart around him at the precise seams Victor Soren had spent 2 years finding. He arrived at the hospital at 1:40 a.m. He went up to the ICU floor, and found the waiting room empty, except for Selene, who was sitting in the corner chair with her knees pulled up and her head leaning against the wall and her eyes closed, not quite asleep, in the way of someone whose body has claimed rest over the owner's objection. She opened her eyes when he walked in, registered him, registered the time, registered something in his face that she'd learned to read faster than he was entirely comfortable with. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Stable. No change." She looked at him. "What happened?" "A lot," he said. He sat in the chair beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. "I made a decision tonight." She waited. "I'm ending it," he said. "The organization, everything." He looked at the wall across from them. "I made a call tonight to a federal contact. I'm giving them everything they need to dismantle the Black Crest Syndicate and take Victor Sorin down simultaneously." He paused. "Which means I am very likely going to prison." The waiting room held the particular silence of a place where serious things are said regularly and the walls have stopped being surprised by them. "How long?" Selene asked. "Years," he said. "I have a lawyer I trust, not the one I used to use. She'll negotiate the best terms possible. I'll cooperate fully. It'll still be years." Selene was quiet for a moment. He watched her profile, the clean line of her jaw, the way she held herself even when she was exhausted, a straightness in the spine that was not performance. It was just how she was built. "Helena," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't know how to—" He stopped. "I don't know how to be here for her and also do this. Those two things may not be reconcilable." "They're not," Selene said quietly. "They're not reconcilable. You know that." He looked at his hands, the knuckles still scarred from the ambush. The hands that had done 12 years of terrible things and were now in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m, holding nothing. "Tell me something," he said. She looked at him. "If I do this—" He stopped, started again. "If I go through with this and I lose everything and I'm not here, will she know? Will she understand why?" Selene looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were very clear and very tired. "She already knows why," Selene said. "She's known your whole life. The question was only ever whether you'd catch up with her." He turned toward her, and the proximity was different now than it had been at the kitchen table in the middle of the night. It was denser, more freighted, carrying all the weight of everything that had happened in the days between that first conversation and this one. And she didn't move away from it, and he didn't pretend it was something other than what it was. "I know what I am," he said. "I know what I've done." "I know what you are," Selene said. Her voice was steady, and it cost her that steadiness. He could see that. "But I also know what you could become." His hand moved without the full consent of his brain and covered hers where it rested on the arm of the chair between them. She looked down at it, back up at him. He didn't kiss her. Not here, not now, not in the specific gravity of this place and this night. But his hand stayed on hers, and she didn't move it, and they sat that way while the hospital ran its dark and necessary business around them, and somewhere beyond a set of double doors, an 81-year-old woman breathed carefully in a bed, and somewhere in the city Victor Sorin slept with the confidence of a man who believed the board was set and the game already decided. He was wrong about the game, but he was right about one thing. Everything was about to change. And at 3:40 a.m., the double doors opened and a doctor walked through them with an expression that made Selene's hand go rigid under Damien's, and both of them stood up at exactly the same moment. And the doctor said the words that meant the next version of this story had already. The doctor's name was Reyes, and he was young for this conversation. Too young, with the kind of face that hadn't yet built the full callus required for delivering news like this at 3:40 in the morning to a man who looked the way Damien looked. He said the words carefully. Second stroke. Significant. The next 12 hours would determine the trajectory. He used the word aggressive about the brain event and the word compromised about the cardiac function, and he said them with professional precision, and Damien heard every syllable and filed every syllable, and his hand was no longer on Selene's because at some point in the middle of Dr. Reyes's careful words, he had taken it back and put it in his pocket, where it was now a fist so tight his fingernails were cutting into his palm. Selene asked the questions he couldn't form. The right questions, the medical ones, the ones with answerable parts. What's the current Glasgow score? What does the imaging show for perfusion? What's the protocol for the next 6 hours? She asked them in the voice she used when she was being a professional instead of a person. And Dr. Reyes answered them, and Damien stood beside her and translated each answer into its human meaning while the fluorescent light hummed above all of them. They let him in for 3 minutes. 3 minutes. The hospital's concession to the particular kind of love that doesn't fit inside visiting hours. Helena looked smaller than she had 8 hours ago. And 8 hours ago she had looked smaller than the woman who had stood in a garden and laughed. The machinery had multiplied. The sounds it made were more insistent. Her face was slack in a way that his mother's face had never been slack, not even in sleep. Helena Kurogane had maintained a specific quality of presence even unconscious, as if her body understood that she was someone who kept herself together, and that quality was diminished now in a way that Damien felt in his chest like something structural giving way. He sat beside her. He didn't speak. He held her hand and looked at her face, and the 3 minutes passed and the nurse appeared at the door, and he stood up and leaned close to his mother's ear and said, in Japanese, the language she had taught him before English, the language that lived in a different chamber of his brain where the operational cold couldn't reach. He said the things that mattered, all of them, without editing. Then he walked out, on. He called Elias from the hospital stairwell at 4 a.m., standing on the concrete landing between the second and third floors with the door propped open behind him and the distant sound of the ICU machinery leaking through. Move the timeline up, he said. Damien, we're not ready. Move it up. His voice bounced off the concrete walls and came back to him flattened and strange. Victor knows I made the federal call. He'll know within 24 hours. Marcus has been feeding him for 8 months. He has a pattern for my behavior. He's going to recognize what a call at 1 in the morning to that particular number means. He pressed his free hand flat against the cold concrete of the stairwell wall. We do not have 48 hours. We have less than that. Elias was quiet for 2 seconds. How much less? I don't know. That's the problem. He closed his eyes. Behind them, the image of his mother's face, slack against the pillow. He held it for 1 second and then put it somewhere he could get to later and locked the door. What's our current count for men willing to move? 14. Maybe 17 if the outer 2 come in overnight. Against Victor's compound. His compound has 43 confirmed, possibly more. A pause. Those are bad numbers, Damien. I know what the numbers are. He opened his eyes. The concrete wall was gray and indifferent. What's the federal agent's timeline? When can they move on Victor's operation? He said 48 hours minimum for the warrants. Tell him I need 24. Tell him I'll give him the first disclosure package tonight. Full documentation, everything he needs for probable cause, and I need his people ready to move concurrent with our action on the compound. He paused. Victor cannot be arrested after we hit the compound. He has to be taken simultaneously, or he disappears before the federal warrants reach him. This only works if every door closes at the same time. That's a logistical... Elias. His voice dropped. My mother is upstairs dying, and Victor Soren is the reason this happened now, instead of in her own bed with time to say goodbye. So I am not interested in what's logistically complicated tonight. I am interested in what's possible. Tell me what's possible. The stairwell held the silence. I'll call the agent, Elias said. Give me an hour. You have 40 minutes. He straightened. And I need Marcus. Whatever he knows about Victor's compound, layout, guard rotations, entry points, all of it, tonight. He'll cooperate, Elias said. He's been cooperative since you left. Good. Damien pulled open the stairwell door. And Elias, the people in Portland. Already moved, Elias said quietly. Cora and her mother are in a hotel under a name that has no connection to any of us. My guy is on the door. Something in Damien's chest loosened by a fraction. Thank you. He went back upstairs. Selene was in the waiting room with her phone and a yellow legal pad she'd found somewhere, making notes in her precise small handwriting. Helena's current stats, the doctor's projections, a list of what needed to happen and when. She was building a system around the uncertainty the way she always built systems. Not to control the uncontrollable, but to give herself something functional to do inside it. He recognized the impulse. He'd been doing the same thing his whole life, just with different materials. He sat across from her. I have to leave for a few hours, he said. She looked up. read his face. When? Soon, before dawn. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I need to ask you to stay with her. I know that's what you do here anyway. I know it's not a question of asking, but I'm asking, differently than I'm asking as your employer. She set down the legal pad. Are you going to do something that might mean you don't come back? He looked at her directly. Yes. She held his gaze for a long moment. Her face did the thing it did. The small, precise adjustments. The professional composure doing its work while the person underneath registered the full weight of the information. Her hands were very still on the legal pad. Come back, she said. That was all. Not a question, not a request exactly. Something between a command and a declaration, said in a voice that was very quiet and very steady and cost her something she didn't let him see the full price of. I'll try, he said. Don't try, she said. Come back. He stood, looked at her one more time in the bad hospital light, this woman who had sat at his kitchen table at 3 a.m. crying over a letter, and had somehow, in the weeks since, become the axis around which everything else had started to organize itself without his permission. He thought about saying something that matched the size of what he felt. He decided against it. The size of it deserved better than a hallway at 4 a.m. before he went to do something that might get him killed. He left. The warehouse where they assembled was on the west side, a block from the river, the kind of industrial building that the city was full of and nobody looked at. Damien arrived at 5:30 a.m. to find 14 men already inside and 3 more coming through the door behind him. The space smelled like cold concrete and machine oil and the specific nervous energy sweat of men preparing for something they understood could go wrong. Marcus Hale was there, standing slightly apart from the others, which was appropriate and which Marcus seemed to understand was appropriate. He was there because he was useful and because Damien had said he could be there and for no other reason, and the men who knew what he'd done gave him the particular quality of silence that said they knew. Marcus bore it. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on Damien and the expression of a man who has accepted that this is what earning something back looks like, and it doesn't feel like anything good. Elias had a map, not a digital map, a physical one, printed on large paper and pinned to a piece of plywood propped against the wall. Victor Soren's compound was a converted industrial property 20 minutes east, the kind of place that had been redesigned for exactly the purposes it served. Perimeter walls, interior checkpoints, a main building that had been structurally reinforced and whose windows were not the kind that broke easily. Marcus had been inside twice. He walked them through it with a pointer that was a long screwdriver from someone's tool bag, talking in the flat, precise voice of a man who knows that the thoroughness of this briefing is the only currency he has left. 2 primary entries. Guard rotation at the perimeter every 40 minutes. Interior sentries, 4 minimum, positioned at what Marcus described as the choke points. The corridor between the entry hall and the main operational floor. The staircase to the upper level where Victor kept his office. The loading dock at the rear. Victor himself kept to the upper level after midnight, almost without exception. Almost, Damien said. He has a pattern, Marcus said, but he's not stupid. He varies. I've never seen him vary by more than 2 hours in either direction, but he varies. Where's his security heaviest? The staircase. Marcus tapped the map. 3 men, minimum. Armed, not decorative. Victor doesn't trust elevators. He built the compound so that the only way to reach his floor is that staircase, and he's always believed that a choke point you control is worth more than open space you can't. He paused. He'll have more tonight. He'll know something is coming. The room was quiet. 14 men looking at a map and running the same arithmetic Damien had been running since the stairwell. What's the federal timing? Damien asked Elias. The agent confirmed 2200 tonight, Elias said. His people move at 10 p.m., simultaneous with us. What does simultaneous mean to him specifically? His team at the compound's east entrance, our team at the west. His people have the warrants, they take custody of anyone alive. We clear the path to Victor. Elias paused. He was very clear that Victor Soren is arrested, not killed. That's the condition. Several of the men in the warehouse shifted. One of them, a man named Price, who had been with the organization for 7 years and who had watched a colleague disappear 3 weeks ago when Victor's people cleaned out a warehouse, made a sound that was not quite a word. I heard him, Damien said. Victor Soren is taken alive. He looked at Price. That's not negotiable. Price looked at the floor. If Victor Soren is killed tonight, Damien said, loud enough for all of them, then everything I'm building toward, everything that gets any of us out of this with something on the other side, collapses. Victor alive in federal custody is a weapon. Victor dead is a martyr whose organization survives him. He looked around the room. We are not doing this for revenge. We are doing this to end it, completely, permanently. The warehouse held the words. 10 p.m., Damien said. Get some rest if you can. We move at 9:30. He went back to the hospital at 7 a.m. Helena was unchanged. The doctor used the word stable in the careful way doctors used it when it meant holding rather than improving. Selene was in the chair beside the bed when Damien came in, and she looked up with the specific attentiveness of someone who has been watching a door and trying not to watch a door for several hours. He sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. For an hour, neither of them spoke. The machines made their sounds. The morning light came through the narrow window and moved slowly across the floor. Helena breathed in the careful, shallow way she had been breathing since the previous afternoon, her chest rising and falling with a regularity that the machines helped maintain, and that felt, to Damien, like watching someone hold a position through pure stubbornness. She's been more active than they expected, Selene said quietly. Her vitals have been holding better than the projections from last night. She's stubborn, Damien said. Extraordinarily, Selene said. A beat. Where does she get it? He looked across the bed at Selene, and despite everything, despite the weight of the day ahead and the weight of the night previous and the weight of every debt accumulated over 12 years, despite all of it, something in his chest moved in a way that was not quite pain and not quite the opposite. Her mother, he said, according to her. At 8:30, he stepped out and called Elias. The first disclosure package had reached the federal agent at 6 a.m. 300 pages of documentation, account numbers, network maps, political contacts, the structural skeleton of the Black Crest Syndicate's operational architecture delivered in the format his lawyer had specified. Elias confirmed it had been received and acknowledged. Are we doing this? Elias asked. Yes, Damien said. 14 men against 43. The federal team compensates. On paper. Elias. I'm not arguing, Elias said. I just want you to have the full picture. I've had the full picture for 12 hours. The full picture doesn't change what we do. It changes how carefully we do it. He paused. Brief the men on the east entrance coordination. I don't want anyone shooting at a federal agent in the dark. He went back inside. At noon, he sat alone with Helena for 20 minutes while Selene went to get food she needed to eat, whether she wanted to or not. He talked to his mother, which he had not done in this particular way in a very long time. Not reporting, not updating, not managing her worry, just talking. About the history degree he'd abandoned at 22. About a summer in Kyoto when he was 9 years old and his father had been, briefly and inexplicably, someone who took his son to see temples and eat breakfast at small restaurants and pretend that the world outside that summer didn't exist. About the garden and the herb beds under the white sheet and the lamb stew Selene had made from the recipe book, and how Helena had smiled when she smelled it from upstairs. He told her about Selene. He told her in the specific terms he had not told anyone, including himself in clear language until approximately right now, what it meant, sitting in a kitchen at 4 a.m. with a woman who was too tired and too honest to perform anything, and having that feel like the first real thing in longer than he could comfortably examine. Helena's hand moved, barely, the slight tightening of fingers that had become her communication. I know, he said. You told me not to be an idiot. The fingers moved again. I'm working on it, he said. At 9 p.m., Damien put on a different suit, not the black one he wore for organizational business, not the gray one he wore for meetings that required a certain kind of authority. He put on the dark navy one that he had owned for 4 years and almost never worn, the one that had no specific associations, the one that was simply a suit, because tonight needed to be the last night that any suit he owned meant what suits had meant to him for 12 years. And wearing a different one was as close as he could get to marking that. He came back to the hospital first. He hadn't planned to. His phone said 9:15 and the car was waiting, and Elias had confirmed the assembly, and there was no operational reason to return to the 4th floor ICU waiting room before driving east. Selene was in the waiting room, She stood up when she saw him. She took in the suit, the time. She understood. He stopped in front of her. Close. The waiting room was empty except for them and the particular weight of everything unsaid over weeks of kitchen tables and hospital chairs and the specific proximity of two people who have been circling something without the space to name it. Helena's vitals improved an hour ago, Selene said. Her voice was steady. Her color is better. She opened her eyes for about 30 seconds at 8 o'clock and she looked at me. Something in Damien's chest cracked open slightly. What did you do? I held her hand and told her you'd be back in the morning. She paused. So you need to make sure that's true. He looked at her face, at the clear dark eyes and the set of the jaw and the exhaustion she was carrying without letting it change the fundamental straightness of her. He thought about Cape Town sunsets he'd never seen and a grandmother he'd never met and a recipe book with crooked handwriting on the word saffron and a woman sitting alone at a kitchen table at 3:47 in the morning crying over a letter while a man in a blood-stained suit stood in the doorway and heard, for the first time in years, something more frightening than a gun. The truth. He kissed her. There in the hospital waiting room at 9:15 p.m., before the worst thing he'd done in 12 years or possibly the last thing he'd ever do, he kissed her with the full weight of everything it was. Not tentative, not managed, not the careful orchestrated thing it might have been in a version of their story with more time. Just honest, the way she was honest, stripped down to what it actually was without the architecture around it. She kissed him back. Her hands came up and held the lapels of the navy suit, and she kissed him back with the specific force of someone who has also been holding something for a long time and is done holding it. And when they separated, she kept her hands on his lapels and looked at him at close range with the eyes he had been thinking about since a kitchen table and a handwritten letter and a sentence about furniture imports. Come back, she said. I will, he said. This time, it wasn't I'll try. Victor Soren's compound sat inside a wall of reinforced concrete on three sides and a chain-link barrier along the rear where the loading dock opened onto a service alley. From the roof of the building across the street, where Elias's advance man had been positioned since 7 p.m., the compound looked dark and quiet, in the way that things look dark and quiet when they are neither. Damien's car stopped 4 blocks out at 9:49, 11 minutes. He checked the weapon at his hip, checked the secondary at his ankle, looked at the men around him in the car, Price and 2 others, all of them with the specific stillness of controlled adrenaline, the kind that doesn't shake, the kind that waits. Remember, Damien said, Victor alive. Everyone else, your judgment. But Victor doesn't die in that building. What if he doesn't give us a choice? Price asked. Make him give you one, Damien said. His earpiece crackled. Elias's voice from the secondary car. Federal team is in position at the east entrance. They confirm ready. Damien checked his watch. 9:52. 8 minutes, he said. The city was quiet around the car. Not silent. Cities were never silent. But the particular quality of 10 p.m. on a weekday in an industrial district was close enough to silence that he could hear his own heartbeat. He counted it. Steady. Faster than resting, but not uncontrolled. The long-practiced rhythm of a man who had done this before and understood that fear was operational information, not a malfunction. He thought about his mother's hand tightening on his. He thought about a woman's hands on his lapels in a hospital waiting room. He thought about a history degree he'd abandoned at 22. 2 minutes, Elias said in his ear. Damien looked through the windshield at the dark street ahead. The compound wall was visible from here. The top of it, the flat edge against the night sky. Somewhere behind it, 43 armed men and the architect of the last 2 years of Damien Kurogane's life were doing what they were doing in the last minutes before everything changed. 90 seconds. Price's hand was on the door handle. The other 2 were the same. The driver had his eyes forward and his jaw tight. 60. Damien's hand went to his door. 30. He thought about one thing, just one. The one thing that had changed the entire geometry of the last 6 months and had made every other change possible. A kitchen, a light. A woman crying over a letter who had looked at a man in a blood-stained suit without flinching and told him the truth. 10 seconds, Elias said. 9. 8. Damien pushed the door open. 7, 6, 5. Cold air hit his face, the industrial district night, the smell of the river 2 blocks away. 4, 3, 2. He was already moving. All of them were already moving. Across the street, from the east, he could see the sweep of federal flashlights cutting across the compound wall. 1. Go! The night exploded. The first shot came from the compound perimeter before they'd covered half the distance. Someone on Victor's detail, who was either better positioned or more nervous than Marcus's intelligence had indicated, and the sound of it cracked across the industrial block and reflected off the concrete walls in multiple directions. And suddenly, the tactical quiet was gone entirely, replaced by the particular chaos of an operation where the other side has had some warning and is not entirely surprised. Damien ran low and fast along the wall's edge toward the west entrance, Price flanking left, the other 2 spreading right, all of them moving in the patterns they'd walked through 3 times in the warehouse with the plywood map. Behind him, he could hear the federal team at the east entrance, the shouted identifications, the layered noise of law enforcement making entry in force. The west gate was steel, reinforced, closed. Now, Damien said into the earpiece. The shaped charge Elias had prepared, small, precise, the minimum necessary for the specific application, went off at the gate hinges, and the steel buckled and swung, and Damien went through the gap before the dust cleared with his weapon up and his eyes moving the way they moved when he'd been trained by 12 years of doing this, mapping positions and angles and the locations of bodies in the dark. 2 men on the other side of the gate, both reaching for positions, both reacting a half-second behind the speed of the entry. Down, Damien said. Hands, now. Ban, Damien, Ishkia. One of them made the calculation correctly and dropped. The other made the other calculation, and Damien's left arm came up instead of the weapon. Closed the distance in 2 steps, used the momentum of the man's own movement against him, and put him on the ground with the specific efficiency of someone who has spent 12 years learning how to remove people from the equation without killing them when the situation allowed. The situation allowed. Zip ties from Price, who was already moving past him toward the interior. Federal team inside the east corridor, Elias said in his ear. 4 contacts down, 2 in custody. Victor's people are... Wait. A sound from inside the compound, not individual shots. The sustained, overlapping sound of multiple weapons from multiple positions, which meant the interior was a different situation than the perimeter. Marcus's count was wrong, Elias said. There are more inside, significantly more. Damien was already moving through the compound's interior toward the main building. The dark ground between the wall and the building was maybe 40 meters. And it was not 40 meters of open space. There were vehicles, equipment, the architectural clutter of an industrial property repurposed. And inside that clutter were Victor's men, reacting, repositioning, some of them better than expected, and some of them exactly as expected, and all of them between Damien and the building's entrance. Price took a round in the left arm and went down on one knee and was back up in 3 seconds, which was how Damien knew Price was going to survive the night. The building entrance was a steel door that was already open. Someone inside had popped it when the charges went off on the perimeter gate, either to let people out or to establish a defensive position at the threshold. And there were 2 men in that threshold with weapons and good angles, and Damien understood in the instant of seeing them that going through that door directly was a calculation that didn't work. East team, he said into the earpiece. Interior corridor, main building. West door has 2. We need already moving. A voice that was not Elias said. The federal team's coordinator. 15 seconds. The gunfire from the east side of the building intensified. The 2 men in the west doorway glanced toward it. Involuntary. Just a flicker. The way the human brain redirects attention to loud, sudden sounds, regardless of what the training says. A flicker was enough. Damien went through the west door. The interior of Victor Soren's main building was marble and industrial steel and low light, the renovation money having been spent on the kind of finishes that were meant to communicate a specific message about the kind of man who lived in them. Damien had been in rooms like this before. He had built a few of them. He moved through this one the way he had moved through his own on the night this had all started. Fast, systematic, using walls and angles and every piece of cover the architecture offered. The ground floor was chaos. Federal agents working east, Damien's men working west, Victor's people caught between them and making the various calculations that people in impossible positions make. Some fighting, some running, one man already sitting on the floor with his hands locked behind his head by his own volition, deciding that the math had resolved clearly enough that immediate surrender was the intelligent choice. The staircase was ahead. Marcus had been right about the choke point. There were 3 men at the base of the stairs, and they were positioned correctly, and they were not the decorative kind. Damien stopped behind a support column 15 feet away and assessed, and behind him he heard Price's boots on the concrete and the 2 others coming up on either side, and the federal team pushing in from the east. And the situation was a geometry problem, and the geometry was solvable if everyone moved at the same second, and there was no guarantee everyone would move at the same second. "Price," Damien said. "Yeah." "Left side. Take the angle off the column." "Got it. When I move, you move." "Yeah." He moved. The next 40 seconds were the kind of 40 seconds that don't resolve into narrative until later. If there is a later, the kind that exist in the body as sensation rather than sequence, as the specific physical record of decisions made faster than thought. Cover, angle, the sound of rounds going into concrete close enough to feel, Price going left with the bloody arm and making the angle work anyway, the federal team pushing from the east at exactly the moment the 3 men at the stairs had to choose which direction was more immediately dangerous and chose wrong. And then the stairs were clear. Damien went up. The upper floor hallway was long and lit with the specific cold light of expensive fixtures and empty of people except for 1 man at the far end. Outside a closed door who raised his weapon the moment Damien appeared at the top of the stairs and was a better shot than the men below had been. And the round caught Damien on the left side below the ribs, and the impact was a massive blunt thing that spun him half around and dropped his shoulder against the wall, and he registered it clinically. Not through ribs, not arterial, deep muscle, serious but not immediately. And then shoved himself back upright because the hallway was 40 feet long and the man was reloading and 40 feet was a distance you could close. He closed it. His shoulder hit the door frame and he went through the door shoulder first, and the world inside Victor Soren's office was shattered marble and overturned furniture and the evidence of a man who had been preparing to leave. Cases open on a desk, documents being sorted, the specific scramble of someone who had heard the charges on the gate and made the calculation that it was time to move. And in the center of it all, standing beside the desk with a weapon in his hand, and the cold, measuring expression of a man who had expected this moment and had simply hoped it would come later, was Victor Soren. He was smaller than Damien had imagined. Not physically small. He was broad and solid, somewhere in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the specific quality of stillness that belonged to men who had been dangerous for a long time and had made peace with it. He looked at Damien in the doorway with the blood spreading through the navy suit on his left side and assessed what he was looking at with the precision of long experience, and the weapon in his hand came up. "You're bleeding," Victor said. "I know," Damien said. "You came with 14 men." 17. Against 43. The federal team compensated. Victor looked at him. "You called the FBI on yourself." "I called them on you," Damien said. "There's a distinction. The weapon stayed up." Damien's weapon stayed up. The 2 men looked at each other across the destroyed office, and the city outside the reinforced window was doing what cities did, indifferent and continuous. And somewhere in it, the federal team was processing the ground floor, and somewhere below, Damien could hear the sound of that processing, and the sound meant that the perimeter was contracting, and Victor Soren, if he was doing the same math Damien was doing, understood that the time window for any option other than standing here was already closed. "You chose love over power," Victor said. "I watched you do it for 6 months. I watched you pull back from territory you should have held and spare men you should have ended and make yourself smaller and softer because of a woman who works in your kitchen." He tilted his head slightly. "That's why you lost." Damien's finger was on the trigger. The weapon was level. The wound in his side was a bright, specific pain that his brain had filed in the operational category and that his body was beginning to argue should be filed somewhere more urgent. He looked at Victor Soren and thought about everything the man had built and everything the man had destroyed and the systematic precision with which he had spent 2 years dismantling every exit Damien had planned. And he felt, very clearly, the desire to end it in the simple way. The way 12 years of this life had trained him to end things. He felt it clearly. He looked at it directly, and then he heard, not a voice exactly, but a quality. His mother's hand on his, the tightening of fingers, the specific physical language of a woman who had spent 30 years believing her son could still become good, and who had communicated that belief in the only way that had ever reached him, which was through her hands. Damien lowered the weapon, 2 inches, enough to signal. "You're wrong," he said to Victor Soren. "I didn't lose. I changed the game." He reached into his jacket with his free hand, slow, visible, nothing about the motion that was a threat, and pulled out his phone. "Federal agents are on this floor in approximately 90 seconds. You can be arrested or you can be shot by them when they come through that door. I'd recommend the first option." He paused. "I'm going to need you alive and talking for the next year. You're the primary case. Everything I gave them is built around you." He held Victor's gaze. "Which means you matter more to me breathing than dead. So put the weapon down." Victor Soren looked at him. The assessment was long and cold and thorough. The weapon didn't come down, but it didn't fire either, and in the specific calculus of this moment, that was its own kind of answer. "You think this ends with you walking out of here?" Victor said. "No," Damien said. He could feel the blood reaching the waistband of his trousers now, the warm spread of it, the body's accounting. "I know exactly how this ends for me. I planned it." He kept his eyes on Victor. "The question is how it ends for you, and that—" His voice was very level, very tired, very honest. "That is entirely your choice." Downstairs, the sound of federal agents reaching the staircase. Victor Soren looked at the man bleeding in his doorway and made— Victor Soren set the weapon on the desk, not dropped it, set it. With the precise, deliberate motion of a man who had spent 40 years making sure that every action he took communicated exactly what he intended it to communicate, and what this one communicated was, "I am not surrendering to you. I am making a strategic decision in unfavorable conditions." The distinction mattered to him. Damien could see that it mattered to him. He let it matter. A man like Victor needed to keep something, even at the end. The federal agents came through the door 11 seconds later. 4 of them, moving fast and organized, weapons up, the shouted sequence of identifications and commands that was their version of the same choreography Damien had been running downstairs. They saw Victor's weapon on the desk, and Victor's hands coming up, and Damien bleeding in the doorway with his own weapon lowered. And the coordinator, the voice from the earpiece, now a face, mid-40s, the no-nonsense build of someone who had been doing this for a long time, assessed the scene in approximately 2 seconds and said, "Kurogane, you're hit." "I know," Damien said. For the 3rd time tonight, it was becoming a refrain. "How bad?" "Bad enough." He looked at Victor being moved toward the wall, hands being brought down and secured, the whole machinery of federal arrest operating with its particular impersonal efficiency. He watched it happen and felt something drain out of him that wasn't blood. Something older and heavier that had been in him so long he'd stopped feeling its weight until it began to go. "He's the primary," Damien said. "Everything you need is in the disclosure package. He'll talk eventually. Give him the right offer and he'll talk faster." "Mustum, we know how to do our jobs," the coordinator said, not unkindly. Victor, hands cuffed behind him now, looked at Damien one last time across the destroyed office. His face was the face of a man who was doing arithmetic in his head, recalculating, finding the new angles inside the new situation. A man like Victor never stopped finding angles. Damien understood that. He'd been that man. "You'll regret the choice," Victor said. Quiet. Conversational, the way he said everything. "Men like us don't get to become something else. The world won't let us." Damien looked at him. "Men like us," he said, "are what we decide to be, every day. Not once. Not at the end." He paused. "You just never decided differently. That's the only difference between us." Victor said nothing more. Damien turned and walked out of the office and down the hall, and Price was at the top of the stairs with his wounded arm wrapped in someone's torn shirt. And when he saw Damien, he said something short and profane that expressed both relief and alarm in equal measure. And Damien nodded and kept walking and made it to the bottom of the stairs before his legs made the executive decision to stop cooperating. He went down against the wall, not falling exactly, more like a controlled descent, and sat on the bottom step with his back against the wall and his hand pressed to his left side, and the building around him full of the aftermath of what had just happened. Men in handcuffs, federal agents with tablets and evidence bags, Price crouching in front of him saying something about a medic, Elias appearing from somewhere with his tie gone, and a look on his face that was the complicated look of a man who is simultaneously relieved and already thinking about consequences. The others? Damien asked. 3 of ours hit, Elias said. None fatal. Victor's people. 12 in custody, 7 who ran before the perimeter closed, the rest... He paused. The rest are accounted for. Damien closed his eyes briefly, opened them. Marcus. He's outside. He's okay. Another pause. He kept his head tonight. Good. The hand against his side was wet, and the pain had graduated from the operational category to something more insistent. I need a hospital. I know. Ambulance is 2 minutes out. I need to be at a specific hospital. Elias looked at him. I know that too, he said. Love. The ride was 22 minutes and Damien was conscious for all of it, which required more work than it should have, and which he managed by thinking about specific things in a deliberate sequence. The herb beds under the white sheet, the recipe book with the crooked handwriting, the way a hospital waiting room at 9:15 p.m. could contain something that outweighed everything else in the building and most of the city outside it. He thought about his mother's hand. He thought about a sentence spoken quietly in a waiting room. Come back. He had. The ER at St. Catherine's Medical Center processed him with the urgency the wound warranted, and somewhere in the process of being transferred from gurney to examination table to imaging to the OR for a procedure that the surgeon described as necessary and manageable, in the specific tone of surgeons who want you to be calm and know that if they give you more detail, you won't be. Somewhere in that process, Damien asked twice about the 4th floor and got no information either time because the people managing his immediate situation were focused on the immediate situation and had no time for questions about other floors. He went under. He came back at 4:17 a.m. in a recovery room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, with an IV in his right arm and a pressure bandage on his left side, and the particular disoriented heaviness of someone returning from anesthesia who was not entirely sure what configuration the world would be in when they fully arrived. Elias was in the chair beside the bed. Helena, Damien said. The word came out rough and too loud for the room. Stable, Elias said immediately. No change overnight. She's still on the 4th floor. She's the same. He let out a breath. Selene. Upstairs with Helena. Elias leaned forward. She knows you're here. She knows you're okay. I told her myself. A pause. She said, and I'm quoting, tell him to stay in that bed until a doctor says otherwise. Damien almost smiled. What did you say? I said I'd pass it along, Elias said. I didn't promise results. The recovery room held the quiet of early morning. Outside the single window, the sky was doing the same thing it had done on the first morning. The first kitchen, the first coffee. The barely perceptible shift from dark to less dark that preceded dawn. Damien looked at it and thought about the fact that he had been awake for nearly 24 hours and had been shot and had burned down the empire he'd spent 12 years building and had kissed a woman in a hospital waiting room before doing both of those things. And the relative weight of those events when he laid them side by side was not what it would have been 12 months ago, or 6 months ago, or even 6 weeks ago. Victor? He asked. Federal processing, Elias said. The coordinator confirmed he's being booked at the federal facility. With what you gave them last night, plus whatever Victor's people start saying when the offers come, the coordinator thinks it's a comprehensive case. Victor won't see the outside of a cell for a very long time. He paused. If ever. His organization is decapitated. Without Victor, there's no center. The lieutenants will scatter or flip. It's done. Elias looked at his hands for a moment. Ours too, of course. Yes, Damien said. Ours too. They sat with that for a moment. 12 years. The weight of it. The particular grief of dismantling something you built, even when dismantling it, is exactly right. Elias, Damien said, I know what you're going to say. I'm going to say it anyway. He looked at the man who had been beside him for 19 years, first for his father and then for him. The man who had warned him and protected him, and occasionally been wrong beside him in the specific loyal way that made being wrong beside someone mean something. Whatever I can do for you in terms of the federal situation, whatever cooperation on my end reduces your exposure, I'm going to do it. Elias nodded. I know, and I'm going to tell them you warned me, Damien said. About all of it. The things you said. About becoming different. About the risks. You told me the truth consistently, and I want that on record. Elias looked at him for a long moment with the complicated expression of a man who has been doing difficult things for a long time and is not entirely sure how to receive the simple ones. Get some rest, he said finally. In an hour, Damien said. Help me upstairs first. The doctor said otherwise. The doctor, a woman of about 50 with the efficient manner of someone who had been arguing with patients about staying in bed since before Damien was born, said that the wound, while not life-threatening given the intervention, was exactly the kind of injury that became life-threatening if the person attached to it made poor decisions in the hours following surgery, and that poor decisions included vertical movement and staircases and anything that raised his heart rate above a careful walking pace. She said this clearly and with authority. Damien listened to all of it and then said, 4th floor. The doctor looked at him, then at Elias, then back at him. She was the kind of woman who could read a room correctly and had learned which arguments were winnable and which were the other kind. Wheelchair, she said, and someone with you at all times. And if that incision opens, I will be extremely unhappy. Understood, Damien said. Elias pushed the wheelchair, which was an experience Damien suspected neither of them would ever discuss again, and the elevator opened onto the 4th floor at 5:40 a.m., and the hallway was the quiet hallway of an ICU in the hours before the shift change, low light, and the sounds of machinery doing the work of keeping people alive. Selene was in the hallway outside Helena's room. She had seen them coming from the nurse's station. She was already moving when the elevator opened, and she stopped when she saw him in the wheelchair and did something with her face that was the very rapid suppression of what had been there before the suppression, which he caught anyway because he'd been learning to read her face the way she'd been learning to read his. She crouched down in front of the wheelchair so she was level with him. She looked at his face, his color, the arm with the IV bruising. She was doing the medical assessment first, automatically, the professional moving through its checklist, and he let her do it because he understood it was also how she was letting herself breathe. Surgery? She asked. Clean, he said. They said clean. How many units? 2. She nodded, pressed her lips together briefly. Then she put her hand on the arm of the wheelchair. Not on his arm, on the chair, and looked at him with the eyes that had been the first honest thing in a very long time and said, very quietly, You came back. I told you I would, he said. She stood up, straightened, looked at Elias. There's coffee at the nurse's station. The night nurse makes it strong. She looked back at Damien. Your mother has been asking for you, in her way. She paused. The left side weakness is significant, but she can communicate. She knows where she is. She knows what happened. Does she know about... He gestured vaguely at the general situation. She knows you're safe, Selene said. I told her that much. A beat. The rest can wait until she's stronger. He nodded. I'll take you in, she said. Helena was awake. Not fully. The sedation had a long tail and the stroke had taken something from her that would take time to fully map, but her eyes were open and tracking, and when Damien's wheelchair came through the door, she turned her head toward him in the slow, deliberate way of someone working with reduced capacity, but working nonetheless. Her face on the left side had the subtle asymmetry of the stroke's damage. Her right side was still her. Her right hand moved toward him. He took it. He held it in both of his carefully, the way you hold something that requires care, without requiring to be treated like it might break. Because Helena Kurogane had never wanted to be handled like something fragile, even when she was... She looked at his face for a long time. Her eyes moved over it the way they had always moved over it, looking for the things underneath the surface, the real accounting, the version he didn't show other people. She had always been able to find it. She found it now. Her right hand tightened on his. I know, he said. His voice was low and rough from the anesthesia and the night. It's done. All of it. It's done. Her eyes stayed on his. I made the call, he said. I gave them everything. Victor is in federal custody. He paused. I'm going to prison, Mama, for a long time. I have a lawyer and she's good and I'll cooperate fully and the timeline is years, but not forever. He looked at his mother's face and said the true version. I'm sorry I built something that meant this was the only way out of it. I'm sorry it took me so long to choose the exit over the empire. He stopped. I'm sorry for a lot of things that I'm going to spend the next several years writing down, if you'll read them. Her right hand moved, not squeezing, something more specific. A small, deliberate pat, repeated. The particular rhythm of a woman who was saying, enough, enough apology. I know, I already knew. You've caught up. He put his forehead down on their joined hands and stayed there for a moment. In the chair on the other side of the bed, Selene sat quietly and looked out the window at the morning that was now fully arriving, the gray giving way to something with actual color in it, the city outside taking on its daytime shape. She gave them what the moment needed, which was the particular kind of witness that doesn't intrude, that simply holds the space. After a while, Helena's eyes moved to Selene. The look she gave was long and clear and carried everything she couldn't say with a damaged face and a compromised voice. Everything she'd been saying in garden conversations and recipe books and small deliberate nudges toward a truth her son was still learning to walk toward. Selene received the look, and something in her expression changed in the way things change when you understand that you've been seen completely by someone who approves of what they see. Helena's hand reached out slightly, toward Selene. Selene took it, and for a moment, Helena Kurogane held both of their hands at once. Her son's damaged ones and the steady, capable ones of the woman who had come to care for her and stayed for reasons that had grown into something none of them had planned. And her face did something that was not a smile exactly, but lived in the neighborhood of one. And then her eyes closed and she went back to the careful work of sleeping toward recovery. The federal lawyer's name was Diana Osei, and she was 62 years old and had spent 30 years doing the specific kind of work that lived at the intersection of criminal defense and prosecutorial cooperation, which was a narrow road that required someone who could hold absolute honesty and absolute strategy in both hands at the same time without dropping either. Elias had found her. Damien had approved her after a single phone call during which she told him 3 things he hadn't wanted to hear in the first 5 minutes, and he'd understood she was exactly right about all 3 of them. She came to the hospital at 9 a.m. She sat across from Damien in the recovery room. He'd been moved back downstairs after the visit to Helena under the terms the surgeon had set and which he had not violated, with a legal pad and a recorder and the particular focused stillness of someone for whom this was serious work rather than performance. She laid it out clean, with full cooperation, testimony, documentation, complete organizational disclosure, identification of the political contacts and the laundering networks and the offshore architecture. The federal prosecutor was looking at a plea structure that would put Damien in federal prison for a minimum of 10 years with parole eligibility after 7. No bargaining below 10. The crimes were real and the sentence needed to be real, or the cooperation meant nothing and the case meant nothing. 10 years, Damien said. Minimum, Diana said. With behavior and cooperation maintained, parole at 7 is realistic. Not guaranteed. Realistic. He was 41 years old. 7 years made him 48. 10 years made him 51. What about the men who were with me last night? He asked. That's a separate conversation for each of them, Diana said. I can't negotiate their situations in this meeting. I want it to be part of the terms, Damien said. The men who came with me last night. They were there because I asked them to be and because they trusted me. And some of them are going to face exposure from the disclosures I've made. I want whatever cooperation credit accrues from my testimony to be usable on their behalf. Diana looked at him. That's not standard. I know it's not standard. It will complicate the negotiations. I know that too. He held her gaze. I built what I built and the men who worked inside it did so because that was the world I created, and I am not going to dismantle the organization and leave the people who trusted it with nothing. He paused. That's a condition, not a preference. Diana wrote something on the legal pad. I'll present it, she said. I'm not promising the outcome. Present it, Damien said. She looked at him with the assessing quality she'd had since she walked in. You know, she said, in 30 years of this work, defendants in your position don't usually lead with protecting other people. I'm aware, Damien said. I'm trying to be different. Diana almost smiled. Almost. One more thing, she said. Marcus Hale. He cooperated fully, Damien said. He was under coercion. His daughter was threatened. I want that on record clearly. Noted. She clicked her pen. Anything else before we get into the specifics? He thought about it. Thought about the kitchen and the letter and 3 months of a woman who told him the truth without dressing it up. Thought about the garden and the herb beds and an old woman who had spent 30 years believing something her son was only now catching up to. No, he said. Let's get into the specifics. Marcus Hale sat across from Damien in the hospital room at 11 a.m. with the particular posture of a man who doesn't know which version of a conversation he's walking into and has decided to sit very still until he figures it out. Damien looked at him. The face of 9 years. The face of 8 months of betrayal that had its roots in a father's love for a 7-year-old girl named Cora, which was the most human root a betrayal could have, and which made it no less damaging and no less real, and also made it exactly the kind of thing that Damien Kurogane, who had spent 12 years building an empire on the premise that the world was divided between the strong and the used, was not going to respond to the way he would have responded 6 months ago. Cora's okay, Damien said. Marcus exhaled a long, controlled breath. Your guy confirmed this morning she's... He stopped. Thank you. I told you I'd handle it. He paused. Diana Osei is going to be in contact with you about your situation. You cooperated last night, and you cooperated fully with Elias, and you have a minor child who was used as a lever against you by a man who specialized in exactly that. All of that goes into the record. He watched Marcus's face. It won't make it disappear, but it matters. Marcus looked at the floor, then up. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't... It doesn't fix anything, Damien said. No, but I believe you mean it. He leaned back against the pillow. 2 of my men are dead, in part because of what Victor knew through you. I need you to understand that I am holding that, and I will be holding it for a long time. And I am still doing what I'm doing for your situation, not because we're square, but because it's right, and because your daughter should not carry what her father did. He paused. Can you hold both of those things at once? Marcus met his eyes. Yes, he said. Good, Damien said. Then we understand each other. Listened. Selene came to his room at 2 p.m. She came in the way she moved through every room, without announcement, without the performance of arrival, just present in the way she was always present, carrying a paper bag that turned out to contain actual food from somewhere outside the hospital, because she had apparently identified that the hospital food was not going to be adequate for the specific requirements of recovery from a gunshot wound, and had done something about it with the same efficiency she applied to everything. She set the bag on the rolling table, pulled the chair from the corner, sat down. Helena ate lunch, she said, more than I expected. She's communicating more clearly than the projections suggested. Her speech is coming back. A pause. She's going to need extensive rehabilitation, months of it. The left side weakness may be permanent to some degree, but her cognition is... She's still her. I know, Damien said. I was with her this morning. I know you were. She looked at him with the clear, direct look. I mean, you should know she's still her even after everything. She's not diminished. She's just... She searched for the word. Renegotiating. He looked at her across the hospital room. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, and it put a warmth on everything that the room hadn't had before. Or maybe it had had it before, and he hadn't been looking. I pled guilty this afternoon, he said. Diana submitted the formal cooperation agreement. It's done. Selene nodded. She'd known this was coming. He'd told her enough in pieces that she'd been able to build the shape of it. 7 to 10 years, he said. She didn't look away. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, something in the word, the way she said it. Not dismissal, acknowledgement, the full weight of the thing being held and received. I need you to understand what that actually means. I'm not going to be here for years. I understand what years means, Selene said. Your sister needs you. Nursing school, the house. Damien. She said his name with a patience and a firmness that stopped the list in his throat. I know what I'm taking on. I am 26 years old, and I grew up with very little, and I have been making clear-eyed decisions about difficult situations since before I could legally drive. Do not explain to me what years means." He looked at her. "I'm staying with Helena," she said, "for as long as she needs me. That is my choice, and I made it before any of this, and I'm not changing it." She paused. "Amara is recovering. The surgery is scheduled. She's going to be okay." A small breath. "And as for the rest," she looked at her hands for a moment, the hands that had held Helena's hands and held his that morning in the waiting room. "I will write to you," she said, "every week. I wrote to my sister from across an ocean for 2 years while she was sick. I know how to write to someone who's not there." The hospital room was very quiet. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to," she said. "That's the point. I don't have to. I'm choosing to." She looked at him with the eyes that had first looked at him across a kitchen table at 4 a.m. Clear, direct, unwilling to look away from the hard version of things. "The question is whether you'll write back." "Every week," he said. She nodded. "Good." She reached into the paper bag and produced a container of something that smelled like it had taken time and care to make. "Now eat," she said. "The surgeon said you need protein and you need to sleep, in that order, and Helena is going to want to see you this evening, so you need to be functional enough to walk a hallway." She set the container on the table, met his eyes one more time. "Everything else can wait until you've slept." He looked at the food, looked at her. "Selene." "Eat," she said. He ate. He was transferred to federal custody 6 weeks later. In those 6 weeks, Helena came home. She came home on a Tuesday in December in a wheelchair she hated, with a physical therapist who came 4 mornings a week, and an occupational therapist who came twice, and Selene, who had reorganized the ground floor of the house to make it accessible in ways that had required moving furniture and removing thresholds, and installing grab bars in the bathroom, while Helena provided commentary on every decision with the specific opinion of a woman whose cognition was fully intact and whose physical limitations had only sharpened her willingness to use her voice. On the first evening, Damien pushed Helena's wheelchair into the garden. The herb beds had been uncovered. The rosemary was still there, the thyme, the basil that Selene had replanted after the frost. In the last light of a December afternoon, low and gold in the particular quality that belonged to late-year light, the kind that didn't stay long, Helena put her right hand out toward the rosemary and touched it with her fingertips. And Damien watched her do it and understood that some things were worth every single price he had paid. Selene was inside finishing dinner. Helena looked at the garden for a long time. Her speech had improved significantly, enough for sentences, enough for the things that mattered. She turned her head toward Damien, who was crouched beside the wheelchair at her level, and she looked at his face in the late gold light, and she said, with the careful precision of a woman rebuilding her language word by word, "You made the right choice." "I know," Damien said. "Say it properly," she said. He looked at her. He thought about 12 years and the weight of them. He thought about the specific arithmetic of a life that had gone wrong at a particular point and had been going wrong along that trajectory ever since, accumulating damage, and about the much smaller arithmetic of the last several months, which had gone differently along a trajectory he hadn't chosen but had eventually stopped fighting. "I made the right choice," he said. Helena's right hand came up and touched his face. Brief. The way she had touched things in the garden. Specific, knowing. The touch of someone who understands what she is touching. "Finally," she said. "This." The morning of the transfer, Selene made breakfast. Not the elaborate kind. Eggs and toast and strong coffee, the ordinary meal of the ordinary morning, because that was what the moment deserved. Not ceremony, not the performance of significance, just the normal human thing of feeding someone before they left. They ate together at the kitchen table for the last time in a long time. The morning light came through the window at a low angle and lay across the surface of the table between them. And neither of them said much, because most of what needed saying had been said in the 6 weeks between the compound and this morning, in conversations that had happened in hospital rooms and in this kitchen and in the garden, and once, memorably, in the car outside a pharmacy where Selene had needed to stop, and Damien had been with her, and they had sat in the parked car for 45 minutes talking about Cape Town, and a history degree, and a grandmother's recipe for lamb stew, and what it meant to build something in the wreckage of something else. The tomatoes, Damien said, looking out at the garden. What about them? Helena says to plant them in March. She says the instruction in the book is wrong about the timing. She told me that last week, Selene said. She told me 3 times. She wants to make sure you know. I know. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I'm going to plant them in March. He looked at her, at the table between them, at the kitchen that had become the room where everything real happened. The confessions and the coffee and the letters and the lamb stew and the first real laugh and the first honest thing and all the subsequent honest things that had built themselves into something he didn't have a clean word for, but that was, in every way that mattered, the most important structure he had ever been part of. I'll be different when I come out, he said. 7 years. I'll be different. You're already different, Selene said. You've been different for months. More different. She looked at him steadily. Good, she said. So will I. He reached across the table and she didn't move her hands from the coffee cup, but she didn't pull them away when his covered them, and they sat that way while the morning finished arriving outside the window and the city began doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous, not caring in the least about the specific weight of this specific kitchen table at this specific hour. At 9 a.m., the federal transport came. He walked out the front door of the house under the gray December sky with 2 federal marshals and Elias, who had arranged his own cooperation agreement and was facing significantly reduced exposure as a result, and who was standing on the front steps with the expression of a man who was not going to make this into more than it was, because making it into more than it was would not help either of them. They shook hands. The house, Damien said. I'll make sure it's handled, Elias said. Helena's expenses, the staff, whatever Selene needs, and it's all arranged. The accounts that weren't in the disclosure, keep it legal, Damien said. It's already legal. Elias paused. You taught me that eventually. Damien looked at the front of the house, the garden through the gate, the rosemary and the late-season basil, and the bare canes where the tomatoes would go in March. He looked at it the way you look at something you're going to need to carry with you, in the non-physical way for a long time. Selene was in the doorway, not following him out. Standing in the doorway with her arms crossed against the December cold and her eyes on him with the specific quality she had, the clear, direct, unwilling to look away quality that had cut through him that first morning like something his armor had no vocabulary for. He crossed back to her. The marshal at his shoulder allowed it without comment. He kissed her once, brief and specific and carrying everything it carried. Right first, he said. You'll have a letter before you unpack, she said. He stepped back. He looked at her face one more time in the gray winter light. He looked at it the way he had looked at the garden. To carry it. To have it in the place where it would do the most work. Then he turned and walked to the transport and got in. The door closed. He didn't look back. He had learned, somewhere in the last several months, that the way forward didn't require looking back. It required knowing what you were carrying and why you were carrying it, and what you intended to do when you got to wherever the carrying ended. In the years that followed, the city changed the way cities changed. Incremental and continuous, and mostly invisible, until you looked back from a distance and saw how far the thing had moved. Victor Soren was convicted on 47 federal counts. He received 2 consecutive life sentences and was remanded to a federal facility from which he would not be released. His organization dissolved in the way headless organizations dissolved, quickly, chaotically, the men inside it scattering towards survival along whatever vectors were available. Marcus Hale received 18 months in a minimum security facility, fully served, with credit for cooperation. He went to Portland after. Cora started 2nd grade. Her mother sent Damien a card at the federal facility, which he received with the particular kind of surprised recognition of someone encountering grace from a direction they hadn't expected. Elias Vane received immunity in exchange for cooperation that the federal prosecutor described as comprehensive and invaluable. He retired from everything that had constituted the previous 19 years of his life and moved to a city 3 states away and occasionally sent Damien letters that contained 2 sentences of substantive content and several paragraphs of commentary on the food in the new city, which was apparently a matter of serious ongoing concern. Helena Kurogane relearned to walk. Not fully. The left side weakness remained, and she needed a cane, and the stairs were not something her cardiologist endorsed. But she walked in the garden in the spring with her cane and Selene's arm, and the careful pleasure of a woman who has been told what she could not do and has formed her own opinion about the matter. She planted the tomatoes in March, directing Selene's hands with the precise authority of someone who had been growing things for 60 years, and was not going to let something as minor as a stroke change the instruction. She lived to see the tomatoes come in. She lived to see several harvests. Damien served 7 years and 4 months. The parole board met in the spring of the 8th year and reviewed the record of a man who had entered federal prison as the dismantled head of a major criminal organization and had spent the intervening years doing something that the board's documentation described in careful bureaucratic language, but that amounted, stripped of the formal register, to becoming someone different. He had finished the history degree. He had then continued. He had helped build a literacy program inside the facility that had served 240 inmates by the time he left. He had written, across 7 years, 412 letters to a woman in Los Angeles who had written back every single one. He walked out on a Thursday morning in late spring. The sky was overcast, and the air had the particular quality of spring air, clean and complicated, carrying the simultaneous smell of things ending and beginning, the biological optimism of the season that didn't care what had come before it. Selene was parked across the street. She was older. He was older. 7 years had moved through both of them and left its marks the way time left marks. Not damage exactly, more like the evidence of having lived through something real. She was standing beside the car with her arms at her sides and her face in the particular expression she had when she was refusing to perform an emotion she was having. He crossed the street toward her. When he reached her, she looked at him for a moment. The same long, clear look she had given him across a kitchen table at 4 in the morning. The look that saw the real accounting without needing the performance around it. Then she put her arms around him. He put his arms around her. They stood there on a Thursday morning in late spring while the world moved around them with its continuous and different motion, and he held the woman who had written 412 letters to a federal prison address and who had kept his mother's garden and planted the tomatoes in March and opened a small restaurant in the neighborhood that served lamb stew on Sundays using a recipe with crooked handwriting on the word saffron. And he understood something that he had been building toward for 8 years, and that was finally, completely, irreversibly his. Not freedom. He had never been chasing freedom. Something more specific than freedom. Something that had a kitchen and a garden and 412 letters, and a woman who told the truth without dressing it up, and an old woman who had spent 30 years believing something her son had finally caught up with. He had, in the precise clinical vocabulary of the life he'd lived before, nothing, no empire, no organization, no power, no name that meant what it had meant. And standing on a sidewalk in the spring with his arms around Selene Armand, he understood that nothing was exactly the right amount of the wrong things, and everything else was right here.